Assalamu alaikum listeners, welcome back to another episode of Boys in the Cave. I'm your host Tanzim, and alhamdulillah joined by a special guest. I actually invited her onto the show at like around 6 a.m. this morning, so alhamdulillah she agreed to it even though it's pretty early. But alhamdulillah, Naturopath Naimah has been working in the healthcare system with women and children for over 10 years. She specialises in supporting the body for nourishing and repairing to restore optimum health and well-being. Naturopath Naimah also specialises in hormone imbalance, skin disorders and natural fertility. So assalamu alaikum Naimah, and welcome to Boys in the Cave.
Walaikum salam, how are you?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, doing well. Ramadan's a bit intense, but I appreciate you coming on in this early time of the day. I've only a few guests have accepted at this time, so I was actually surprised. I just said it like I just offered it like the first show. I'm just like, can you do 6 a.m? And then you just like, yes, sweet.
Yeah,
so
actually that's perfect. I'm like, no one ever like asks me. Like, I do have some appointments, but normally it's because they're international. So I'm like, oh wow, this is great. I love starting the morning really early.
Yeah, from my end, it's sort of normal, and I think my co-hosts are kind of annoyed by it. That I always tell them to do at 6 a.m. because like we have a lot of guests that are from like America and UK, and so 6 a.m. for us is more like 2 p.m. for them and all that. So it's like I'm sort of used to this time anyway. So
okay, that's great.
But in terms of why I wanted you on is because I've seen your works online, alhamdulillah, even, for the past, few months. Like I was following you through Instagram. So you're ssort of, specializing in an area that's a bit interesting. So I think like it would be good to kind of get into that. But not only that, it's that on top of that, we have good ties with Muhammad Ishaq, and we saw that, you kind of teamed up with him to do a workshop. So I'm like, this is perfect. Like I can actually attend your workshop, which I did. It was 2 days ago, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so I attended, alhamdulillah, very beneficial. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to attend this and then do an episode with you to just get more of an understanding and see what we can kind of have an interesting conversation, inshallah, the listeners can benefit from. But just to get into it, what made you want to like team up? It seems like you and Muhammad Ishaq have the same teacher, I think. So I think, you've been guys working together, kind of bouncing off each other for some time. So could you just kind of give us an idea, what made you want to, team up with Muhammad Ishaq and what's sort of happening on that end?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's very interesting. So when Muhammad Ishaq first came to Australia and did the Temperaments talk, I was actually, one of my friends asked me to come to that temperament talk, and I thought, oh no, like if he's doing temperaments for the public, then it's not for me because I've already learned some of this from, part of my, naturopathy. But when I went, subhanAllah, I was like very, very surprised, and my eyes were just like open because it wasn't what I expected. And when my friend invited me, I actually just didn't want to say no to her, to be honest. But, and I thought, well, I'm probably going to hear things I already know. That I kind of came in with that attitude. And then I remember he actually specifically said in the beginning, just leave your studies behind and just kind of come in with an open mind and listen to, what he's got to share. And then from there, then I went and studied with his teacher as well further. And it kind of just cemented and put everything together with what I had learned previously, but in a different way, in a very different way as well. So I feel like it's been such a blessing to have learnt all about it because it has changed my practice around so much. But working with Muhammad Ishaq, well, there's no one really else that I know that knows about temperaments, at his level. And so it's really good when you're bouncing off, like, for example, me talking about temperaments from the health perspective, as you would have seen the other day, how it's got its ties and it's got its differences. It's not differences, but different perspective about it too. And when you combine it together, it's just amazing. So, yeah, alhamdulillah, that's how we got into it. And what did you think of the workshop the other day?
Yeah, mashallah. I think it's kind of like to give kind of a background from my end, actually, when the first time I did the episode with Mohammed's talk, it was like 3 hours long. But I didn't. He came to Sydney to do a workshop, but I didn't end up going to that workshop. But like it was on a weekend, and I've cricket and stuff. But however, I did that episode, and it kind of like shook my perspective a lot. So then, you know, I started looking into it. Then he came back again, which wasn't too long ago, and then I did his workshop. So it kind of got me into that kind of what do you call it? It kind of shakes your perspective a lot more. So then that's kind of what I also underwent with like your workshop. It was just another different kind of shaking of perspective where I guess it was really interesting. Like we can talk about the differences because I know there's a lot of skeptics, but it was just like it made a lot of sense. Like to me, the 4 temperaments already makes sense because you know, when you see something work in real life, you're just like, you can't really deny it.
You can't unsee it. Once you see, you can't unsee. It's like one of those
exactly
things.
And then like when I saw it with like when I was looking into when I took your workshop, it was kind of an extension, so I couldn't really deny it, if that makes sense, because like if you already know, like for example, a choleric temperament and a sanguine temperament act in this manner, then you kind of can see or you can kind of already like from what you've discussed, you can already see like what kind of comes out from that on a physical level or an emotional level. It kind of, you know, it's another step, you get what I mean? So it's kind of what I'm exactly. And I think even like before we started recording, I sent you some questions, and even the idea of like, you know, stress, addiction, I can see like certain temperaments being inclined to, you know, one and another, and so that's why it was kind of eye-opening in that sense. But just to even because I know I don't want to kind of jump into it without kind of defining terms, because then maybe our audience will be a bit more confused, because I sort of have a bit more not really of a background, but also a bit more of an understanding, because I took that workshop that you hosted. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of, because there's a lot of terms with what you do when it comes to, you know, you take care of, you know, holistic health, and alternative medicine, naturopathy. It's sort of, you know, all these terms that are thrown around when it comes to your practice and your profession. Could you define all those terms, and could you and also are there also links between one and the other?
Okay, so holistic medicine holistic medicine, I guess, is a term that is used for all types of lots of different modalities that encompasses, like, you know, mind, body, spirit, which also, like, you know, Unani medicine is covered under holistic medicine, naturopathy is covered under holistic medicine. I would say traditional Chinese medicine is also covered under there, and a few other modalities I would say are covered under holistic medicine, where they consider all aspects of the human, and, you know, that everything is connected in terms of the body and the health, and then, you know, everything they're interacting with. So all those modalities all, I think, fall under the umbrella holistic medicine. Whereas alternative medicine, I think, is a term that has been coined after you know, modern medicine kind of came into place, and then so initially when modern medicine first came into place and was established like as the one to go by, then everything else was kind of like, that was a stage of where there was witch doctors, you know, where they would classify anyone else, you know, as a witch, and you know, in those times they would do something extreme with those kind of doctors. And then I think that's over time, as it kind of, the need for it came back, it started being called alternative medicine. In my view, though, I guess it depends on your perspective. Like, do you want it to be an alternative medicine, or do you want it to be a complementary medicine? That's up to you how you choose. I feel like that is not a term that is the same for everyone, the definition of that. Whereas naturopathy is more like so what I've originally studied in the uni, and it's more when natural medicine kind of came back into practice, and people started studying institutions of teaching this type of medicine again in the Western world. So it started in America, where but obviously the roots of that came way back. But that term was coined in America when it all started coming back into place. And, you know, they wanted to provide an education pathway, and they called it naturopathy, which the principles very similar to Hippocrates principles, where it's do no harm, the doctor as the teacher, not the, and then also let's see if I can remember all of them. So do no harm. So you treat the person, not the disease. Heal thyself. So the body has its own natural healing abilities. So we try to use the least invasive forms of medicine to promote and support that healing that's already going on. But always making sure that you're doing no harm. That's one of the first things. And then another thing I would say is assessing what is best for that client. So it's an individual approach. It's as approach to one size fits all. So yeah, so I would say those are the three terms defined in a nutshell.
So in terms of you mentioned with naturopathy, it's the idea of I guess natural medicine did make a comeback essentially. I assume how it's sort of pictured is with the Industrial Revolution and everything, and then everyone sort of does more research into science, and then they have this medicine and they kind of prescribe it to people, and during that phase natural medicine was sort of eradicated, and then it sort of made a comeback. So why do you think natural medicine has started to make a comeback now?
Yeah, I think if you realize as well now more than ever, it's having a comeback because there's the demand, there's the need. And so when modern medicine first came into place, it would have been because the introduction of antibiotics, and they would have seen how amazing it was, antibiotics saving lives. People were dying at that time by infections they couldn't control, and they were doing very extreme things to try and control infection. And now there's this thing that you could take, penicillin, that, would stop that infection without doing all those dramatic, things that they were doing at that time, which included cutting people's limbs off. So now this was hailed because it was saving lives, which at that time would have been, excellent and amazing. Even till now, it helps to save lives. But also at the same time, I guess, then when they were able to control that spread of infection, then they were able to also manage hygiene and things like that. So a lot of diseases were then not eradicated, but, there were some that were eradicated, and then they slowly kind of went. And in some areas, obviously, of the world, we still see them. But so with that dramatic change, it was very easy for everyone to be like, okay, well, this is the way we're going. We're not using natural medicine. It's not working. But then over time, it's I think when people take an extreme approach to anything, then you lose sight of the benefits of the other end. And it's only when you start becoming too extreme, then you start to realize we still need that other, the other end of the spectrum. So I think that's when people started realizing that, lifestyle factors were still a big issue. But now it's more of diet. Diet is, another issue that's coming around. A lot of people have issues with digestive systems. A lot of people have issues with stress, for example. And so there's a lot of issues in our diet and our lifestyle that then now you see an increase in disease in a different way. So it might not be in terms of infections, which was before, but now it's stemming from lifestyle and diet diseases. So, all the diseases that's connected to stress. So diabetes, cholesterol, heart issues, cancers on the rise. So obesity is on the rise. So all these kind of diseases and autoimmune issues and inflammatory issues that we would see before in adults, now we're seeing in the younger generation, and even in children now that have, there's children that have arthritis and autoimmune diseases that weren't seen previously. So I guess then, then the need is there because, the doctors probably could also see that. And then the people, so now, for example, my clients, they'll come to me after already going through the modern like all, the allopathic route, and then they're not seeing a change, or they're not getting answers from there. And initially, when I first started out, those were the people that were seeing me. They were either the extreme, I'm not touching a pharmaceutical drug ever, I'm not putting a medication in my mouth, and I've never done that, and I will never do that. And so either I was seeing clients like, with that kind of perspective, or I was seeing clients that had been or had really gone through the medical system and not have had answers, or not have had anyone help them or listen to them, or actually address their issues without just giving a pill or a tablet and saying, okay, that should help you. So I guess when a need arises, or when there's that demand, then it starts to come back.
It's really interesting because you sort of brought up the idea of not going to an extreme, and there's some people, like, I guess in this day and age, how we go about society, we see as just taking a tablet and stuff the norm. And I guess what you can kind of clarify if this is what you meant, but I guess what I take from what you're saying is that I guess when you see it as the norm, it's like we've taken extreme end, where before, like in the past, it would have been probably a bit more of a holistic or a naturopathic sort of route. But it was interesting because you mentioned also that some people or clients that you may have had were able to benefit tremendously from what you were doing, because they were using tablets and all that. It wasn't working for them. I guess some skeptics will be like, give us an example. Like, what do you mean? Because a lot of people would be like, naturopathy, there isn't much. Like, I've had this sort of even recently. Like, I was talking to my friend, and he was just like, I told him about naturopathy and stuff, and he was just like, because he's a pharmacist, so he's just like, straight away he's just like, oh nah, it doesn't work, you're wasting your time, don't bother. There's no evidence for it, and I just had a laugh about it. I'm like, all right, chill, relax, bro, like, okay. So I'm just like I didn't try to be all sort of competitive. I'm just like, look, knowledge is knowledge, I just want to learn. Like, that's a lot of people like, I've seen a lot of friends skeptical about the 4 temperaments. I kind of delved into it. I found a lot of tremendous benefit. I'm doing the same thing here, you get what I mean? So what's your sort of would you be able to give like maybe a specific example of where you had you don't have to name obviously the clients, but just instances where they were like, normal sort of tablets and stuff weren't working, but then you prescribed me XYZ and it's been changing my life. And also, could you be able to address, the sort of skeptics when it comes to, this whole idea of there's no evidence for this, and, this doesn't even work, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So I guess number one, I would say the skeptics probably might either they're just ignorant and have passed a judgment or a statement without actually knowing or trying to understand, or B, they have had an experience with someone who was on the other end as well, like, very close-minded with the pharmaceutical medication as well, like not acknowledging the benefits that can give as well. So so in clinic, like, so I was talking, I guess, I think on Muhammad Ishaq's live, about when someone asks me, like, if they're skeptical, like, I've come to the point, I've just seen it help people too many times to even like kind of engage in a argument with a skeptic. It's like, it's not even worth it. Like, another thing is, I know that from my own experience, because obviously I grew up in Sydney, I grew up in the, in time where we all used modern medicine, so there was a lot of things that was new to me as well, and I had to learn it, and I had to see it. And it's very easy for me to say, oh yeah, it works, because I see it all the time, I guess for someone else who doesn't see it, or it's new to them, even like, for example, with the people that are around me, I know it took them years to understand what I was doing. And it was years of me saying, oh, now my client can do this. So for example, I think one of the biggest things is the pill. So the pill for women, the oral contraceptive pill, it's used a lot for any hormonal issues that a woman would have. There's different types of contraceptive pills, but it's being used now incorrectly. And a lot of doctors do acknowledge that. And there are some who, I'm not sure what's happening there, but there are studies to show that, it's being overused because it is your synthetic hormone that is just kind of overriding what your body wasn't doing right. So what a lot of women will see is they'll have issues and with their menstruation cycle, and they will take it, but for as long as they take it, it might help them, and they might have to find one that fits them without giving them the side effects. And then after that, it's like when they come off it, they might have the issues worse. There's a possibility that it could be better, or there's a possibility that it's the same. But it's not even like the possibility of it being better is not even more chances than it being worse or being the same. So I think a lot of people are seeing that, a lot of doctors are seeing that, a lot of researchers are seeing that. And so that's one thing that I would say, that in terms of naturopathy, when we actually address the issues that's causing the hormone imbalance, and it's happening a lot because of stress, because stress is a big factor in terms of hormonal issues. But I guess another thing is, I think another thing is, it sounds very airy-fairy that, a diet and some herbs can, stop you from being in pain every month, something like that. Or that, for example, like, I also said I'll specialize in natural fertility. So, for someone a couple who've been trying to fall pregnant for, like, let's say 10 years, and then, and they've tried the IVF route and everything, and then for someone to say, oh yeah, if you change your diet and take some herbs, you'll fall pregnant. It sounds crazy, because it's like you're competing with all these really strong drugs, and it's like, so you think just a few changes here and there with, some very mild kind of herbs are going to help. Like, so for someone whose mind is like that, it's going to be very hard to understand, very hard to accept. But it's the little things that make a big difference. So let me give you an example. So all right, so I guess this is a very common example, because a lot of people these days are stressed. Yeah, so when you're stressed, the cortisol level rises, which is your stress hormone, which is natural for it to increase in the morning and peak at about 12, and then start going down, and then your melatonin starts increasing, and that's our natural body clock, our natural rhythm. But with the lifestyle that we lead now, like a lot of people have issues falling asleep, a lot of issues with their energy levels. The energy levels are not like peaking where it should. It's at the wrong time. So we can see there's a problem there. Another thing is, so we've got the stress, the fight or flight response, the state that the body can be in, and we've got the rest and repair. So we should be able to alternate between these two states instead of staying in that flight and fight mode. So when we're in that flight and fight mode, the body responds in a way to save itself. Okay, so whatever it is, the body doesn't know the difference between a traffic light, for example, or a bill to pay, and a bear, that's about to fight you or eat you or whatever. So in the flight-fight response in mode, if you were faced with a bear, that flight or fight response would give you the energy, that that quick burst of energy to either fight that bear, that danger in front of you, or to run away. And in the same thing, like the same response would happen, if it's a bill that you're stressing over, or if it's a traffic light. But in that moment when you're stressing over being late or whatever, there is no bear to fight. So there's that rise, right, of the stress hormones, but there is no release of that energy. So it then builds up. But in that response, what we see is that there are a few things that change in that response, in the way the body functions, because it's trying to provide you with the most energy. So because at that time, all the body is thinking is to survive, right? And what do we need to survive is we need the energy and we need the oxygen, we just need breathing oxygen, and we need to have as much energy as possible to fight whatever it is. So the body then slows down or kind of, slows down some systems that's not required for the moment. So if you can like imagine, the body is going to be like, we don't need to digest food at the moment. We're still fighting. So, the digestive system takes a lot of energy. So we'll slow that down. So your digestive system slows down, and everything that's got to do with your digestive system slows down. So that's even like your peristaltic movement, your absorption, the acids in your tummy, the muscles that lines the digestive system. That's all like, tight. And so your pupils are dilated because you need to see better. Your breathing gets shallow because you need that oxygen, that quick oxygen. And another thing is, for energy, you need glucose, right? Glucose is the most easiest form of energy, or it needs to be accessible in the blood. So your body provides that higher amount of glucose in the bloodstream so that it can be quickly converted to oxygen. But if you imagine that glucose level in the blood being high for a period of time that it never goes down, because let's say this person is stressed for a long period of time, it's going to affect things later in like, for example, the receptors that are balancing or managing that blood glucose levels. So when that happens, your insulin receptors start becoming desensitized. So there are a few things that become desensitized. And you can imagine if someone's digestive system has been slowed down for a long time, what happens or if they're always stressing, what happens there? And the immune system also slows down. So then with chronic stress, we see a increase in inflammatory diseases. But another thing I wanted to point out about with the natural fertility and how, like in clinic, that changes things is, so for a woman, men and women have, all the very similar hormones, and very different as well. Like, so for example, men and women both have testosterone, but there's more testosterone in men, and, women and men both have estrogen, but there's more estrogen in women. So testosterone helps you to deal with stress. And a woman, she has progesterone, which also helps her to stay calm. But when she is under stress for a long period of time, she starts to increase in testosterone. And this is actually the body's protective mechanism. When a woman is stressed, the body will understand or protect it by making sure that she doesn't fall pregnant, because she's still dealing with a lot. And so she can't house another human if she can't even deal with what's, her own body processes and what's going on in her life. And the body knows that. And because of the elevated, stress hormones, and then there's that change in the testosterone hormones. And if you were to, with fertility, if you were to see a doctor, like go down that route of giving progesterone, that calming hormone, because that hormone is very sensitive to stress, and it decreases. And for some people it works, but for some people where, let's say, there's nutritional deficiencies alongside that stress, elevated stress levels, just applying that progesterone hormone is not going to actually deal with the problem. So when we do changes in diet and we actually give the person, all the nutrients that they're low in, and give them, and then also we do like lifestyle changes if required with the stress that's around them. If we make those changes, the body also responds to those changes, and then you see that the change with the hormones balancing. And we use herbs. So the thing is, the herbs that we use today is also different in terms of what we used before. Now we use modern technology as well to, kind of keep this advanced. The herbal medicine is, we have it in concentrated form and we have it standardized. And as practitioner, we use only a certain, quality. We use a high standard quality in terms of the herbs that we use. And there is studies on it, there is research on it. There isn't as much research on it as compared to modern medicine, but there is. And even the chemical compounds and the constituents of the herbs, if you know chemistry, you can understand without even doing without even carrying out the studies, you understand that this chemical constituent, what it does. So you should be able to understand its function. So just going back to the point though that these herbs, they are concentrated, so they do make changes. Number one, and that's why also you can't just say all natural is safe. A lot of people think that it does make a change. So if everything was safe, well then that means it's not doing anything. So it is doing something. It is making changes. So therefore, if it's not used correctly, it can potentially be harmful. And then diet changes. So diet changes is another thing, another issue, I guess, nowadays that is kind of a precursor to a lot of these issues. So, the industry, the food industry has changed because of our lifestyle. Is trying to suit our lifestyle. The food industry has changed to suit our lifestyle, but there is a depletion of nutrients even in the soil, even in the produce, and that's why we also see that rise of organic food. There's actually now that term organic, and it's like, okay, so why is there that term organic? And then because now we're seeing that there is a difference in the quality of produce that's being made from organic or not organic. Yeah. So because of this, I guess, lowered nutrients. And if we look at lowered nutrients, stress is also going to be a part of it, because like I said, when we're in that stress response, our digestive system slows down and we're not absorbing the nutrients. So it's kind of like lots of little factors, but it's going to affect you because, it's all in, it's something that you're doing every day. So if it was one day, one thing happened, it's fine, like the stress response, it's actually also very beneficial too. And it can help you, it can save your life and things like that. But you should be able to come out of it, not be going through the stress response the whole day. And then it affects your sleep. And then a lot of people, I ask them, do you wake up tired or refreshed? And, they're still tired. So their sleep hasn't even served the purpose that it should, which is that rest and repair. They're not even able to rest and repair even in their sleep. So that's where we see that it's a problem where you can't just give a pill or a strong medication for that. What they end up offering is antidepressants, which we know, well, I don't know who knows, but a lot of people have had the experience. A lot of people, like enough people have had the experience where most people know that, there is a lot of side effects to antidepressants. And okay, I guess going back to also what I said with the natural medicine, how it can also cause harm because it's doing something. That's the same thing with pharmaceutical medicine, where the reasons why it's got such high side effects is because it's very strong. So herbs are not as strong in direct acting and as pharmaceutical medication, and that's why its side effects is probably not as bad as pharmaceutical medication. And that's where you have to kind of have that, I call it common sense, but obviously it could be my biased opinion, but to me it just looks like common sense, where you assess where the person is at in terms of their health and then choose the medication suitable or choose the modality suitable. So if they've just got a slight stomach ache, they're not going to need anything strong. If they've just got something, that, let's see, if they got mild inflammation, you wouldn't then use, strong anti-inflammatories, because you have to also weigh out the benefits and the risks. So with, for example, with pharmaceutical medication, there's a lot of side effects, but in some cases, the benefits will still outweigh those side effects. But that's not always the case. And so that's where I feel like people just need to open their mind and understand that, with pharmaceutical medication, there's lots of side effects and then there's benefits, and the benefits need to outweigh the side effects. And that's even doctors, when they prescribe to make sure that the benefits are outweighing the risks. So even when they do blood tests, for example, and they find that someone's cholesterol is on the high end, so let's say the cutoff for cholesterol in the blood test is 5.5. If you're at 5.6, 5.7, they're not going to give you medication to lower that cholesterol just yet, because number one, there is, the benefits have not outweighed the risks yet, and number two, it's like it's a medication that they think, okay, you're just going to have to be on it forever. So we're not going to put someone on it forever when it can change, maybe if they just change their diet or change their lifestyle. But, and then in the same case, for example, with blood glucose levels, if your sugar levels are just out of the range, they're not going to put you on those tablets that are going to lower the blood sugar levels, and put you on insulin or anything like that, because of the side effects. It's not yet, like, the benefits are not outweighing the side effects just yet. So until you reach a certain level, then they'll give it to you, and then they'll say that that's what you got to go on for life. So as a naturopath, it's like, okay, well, in that time, that shows that the body is not functioning at its optimum, and we have herbs that don't have that bad side effects. It's the benefits are going to outweigh the side effects in terms of the herbs that can lower or can actually address the cause of the reason of why those levels are high, and then bring them back down to balance without having that effect. So yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah. That was actually very fascinating, because a lot of points were mentioned. In terms of at the beginning, I guess what you made the example of in terms of the hormones and the stress, and like you gave the example of the lady, for example, a woman that's not able to be fall pregnant, and you kind of addressing stress and then testosterone and all that. Would you say that just on that point specifically, would you say like the stress and stuff do play a role in a woman, for example, at times that may not be able to get not be able to fall pregnant?
That's actually the main reason, like as in, obviously there's the stress causes other issues, but that is always, like, in what I see in my clinic, it's always one of the main reasons of why a woman doesn't fall pregnant. And sometimes all I do is I give them some adrenal herbs and they fall pregnant. After they've done IVF. They've done IVF how many times? They've paid $10,000, for how many rounds they've gone through. It's a very, difficult process. It's very excruciating in terms of pain, in terms of emotions, in terms of finance. They go through all of that, and then we use some herbs for a couple of months and they fall pregnant. And so can you imagine me, like, sitting in clinic, and I see this all the time.
Subhanallah.
Yeah, subhanallah. And it's I remember when I first became a naturopath, everything was new to me and everything was amazing. Like, everything was like, wow, because it was my first time seeing the results of those things. But now, so at that time, I would, when someone asks me in terms of when they're being skeptic, I would be like, oh yeah, that's your opinion. I would try to, argue with them and things like that. Whereas now it's like, I know you're talking from a place of ignorance because you haven't seen what I've seen.
SubhanAllah. I was actually talking to Muhammad Ishaq I think a few weeks ago. I messaged him privately just about it was fascinating because even skeptics, like, if you take a temperament lens, that they come from a specific temperament, so that's why they're skeptic. I don't know. So we had this conversation. It was just like, because I've started to not really post too much about 4 temperaments and stuff online, just simply because there's just too many skeptics, and it just kind of messes, you're out to prove someone that's not willing to sort of listen. So I'm just there's no real point. I'm just going to do my thing. If they sort of, if they benefit from it one day, inshallah, then it is what it is, right? I'm not forcing them to kind of be like, oh, you have to accept it, but it's like, at the same time, I can't exhaust my sort of energy. So then I started to discuss, I'm like, definitely there's a sort of temperament kind of perspective to this, right? And then there is I think it's a melancholic choleric that I tend to be more skeptic. So that's why I've started to be empathetic in general. So that's why I just kind of leave it to the side. So that's a pretty like interesting talking point as well in of itself. But in terms of like, I guess your approach, it was really fascinating, is that what I guess what I'm seeing is like, for example, modern medicine will be like, okay, you're not able to fall pregnant. We're just going to address issue, specifically in terms of, I don't know, IVF, for example, right? But I guess what you've sort of done and how you articulate is you kind of broke it down like, okay, the stress, so then this occurs and this increases and that increases, and that's why, glucose, I don't know, testosterone, glucose, etc., and then that's why the woman can't fall pregnant. So we need to kind of, I think even in the workshop, I forgot, it was either you or Mahmoud Ishaq, it was like, it's kind of like peeling back the layers. Like,
Yeah.
you have your sort of,
Yeah.
okay, this is happening now. Let's see what's been happening before. Let's go back, let's take some steps back to see where it stems from, and then addressing that sort of root cause instead. So it's kind of like a fusion of, I guess, like what I've sort of wrote in my notes here, like counseling, psychology, and medicine. So you're sort of prescribing through, like, I guess, counseling and psychology in terms of getting to the root cause of the issues. And in terms of, sorry, because I'm sort of a dummy when it comes to medicine, but you mentioned does chronic stress increase insulin, or is it the other way around? Like, what does insulin sort of come into the picture?
Insulin. Okay, so insulin resistance will increase chronic inflammation. So
is that related to diabetes by any chance?
Yeah. Yep. So diabetes is another one where, you don't get diabetes overnight. I'm talking about type 2 diabetes. It's something that progresses over 10 years. Like stress is a big driver for that. So for some people, if the stress is extreme, it could be less than 10 years. But there's a lot in the diet, in the lifestyle that drives diabetes to that state, and it's that chronic elevated blood glucose levels with the shutting, which is initially actually really like, being in that flight and fight mode for a whole day continuously every day. If you live a life just, stressed, and you can just imagine, like nowadays, a lot of people are in stressful careers, stressful relationships, stressful lives, like everything. A lot of things are stressful and demanding, and for me, what I say is you can't escape stress, right? So it's not like I'm saying, okay, so change your whole lifestyle, go live in the farm and just relax. That's not what I'm saying, but you need to support your body with that. So if your demand of stress is higher, well, then give the body everything it needs to cope with what it's doing. It's not like you leave your body to, like, you go into that stressful situation, but then you leave it alone and not actually address its needs. Do you know what I mean? So if you're in a stressful situation, well, then look at what fuels does the body needs to actually support it. What's happening there and what's wasting away, because obviously that excess energy, where is that coming from? Especially like, there are some people who are stressed or anxious a lot, and they don't eat because they're not hungry. So, but they keep going. They keep going day in, day out. They still do physical things, like, physically taxing jobs, or just, their lives, but without eating, or they'll eat, but they'll eat whatever's in front of them, or they eat whatever's quick, but it's not what the body needs. At that time, the body will need, it uses, for example, more B vitamins, more magnesium, more zinc. So why don't, instead of just ignoring that, just give it what it needs so it can do its job, and still, for example, at night when it's time to sleep, actually rest and repair. And even like, so especially with my Muslim clients, I talk about like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, obviously He's our creator. He knows us. He knows what we're going to deal with. And it's not that we're not going to be stressed. We are. But He has also given us that time, for example, 5 times a day of prayer. If you're praying properly, you're switching back into rest and repair mode every time you pray. So you start the day off in rest and repair mode, but naturally your cortisol levels would rise, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that's the time you go to work. you do all at that time where your cortisol levels are at its peak, and then you pray. And subhanAllah, like I think Muhammad Gilan did a talk recently, and he was saying, there's a reason why it's 2, 4, 4, 3, 4. There's a reasons for that. And I also like look back and I think like, even the Sunnah prayers, how it's, 2 before Fajr, 4 before Dhuhr, nothing at I'm talking about the more the Mu'akkada prayers. And then at Maghrib it's 2 after. So even like, for example, with Dhuhr, if you look at Dhuhr time, that's when your cortisol levels are really high. And that might be when your stress levels are at its peak. And then we're meant to switch into rest and repair mode, or like kind of be present in prayer and things like that. And then you see like, the way I look at it, it's like if a fan is going really, really fast, you can't just kind of stop it. It won't, it's going to be very sudden. Like so with that four rakat before Dhuhr, it's like slowing you down to prepare you to go into your Dhuhr prayer, to actually rest and go back into that rest and repair mode. But even before that, when we make our wudu, even being present in our wudu has to switch us back, because when you go back into present, like if you're present, you're in rest and repair mode. If you're in fight, you're not present. You're worrying about something, therefore you're not present. So if in wudu, okay, we have to make intention, therefore we need to be present. It's very specific what we're taught in how we to make wudu, like whatever madhab you follow, whatever it says, whether you go up to the elbow, whether you go past the elbow, you have to be present to know whether you did that properly. You have to be present to actually know what you're doing. Like obviously, we can go into robotic mode, but are you doing it properly then? And you won't even know. Like if you were in robotic mode and you did your wudu, and someone was to ask you, did you go up to your elbow or did you go past your elbow? You won't know, or even with the face, how it's meant to touch. Like it's very specific. It's like a touch. You need to go up to this side of the right top tip of your forehead to right to your chin. It's very specific. And for me, it's like there's a reason for why it's specific, to be present. And even like gargling, it helps us. If we're gargling properly, it helps us also to switch into that mode. And then if you haven't switched into the mode yet and you want to pray, then you got to make intention there. That should switch you. It's like there's so many steps to try and get you into rest and repair mode. And it's all given, like when just from that time that we make intention to make wudu right up until in your prayer, there's so many things that should switch you to rest and repair mode.
SubhanAllah, I think. Yeah, sorry.
So I think like if it's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows we're going to be going through the stress in the day, and He knows everything about the way our body functions, and He's telling us, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do. And that's why I say to my clients, like we can get stressed, but we also need to be able to get into rest and repair mode, and then go back and deal with. And then you, like for example, after the prayer, then you go back and go into stress, that stress mode. That's fine. You've switched back. Your body's had a moment to switch back. But I guess it's just But I guess it's when it gets too much, is when because there's so many factors to a human, right? So, for example, if you're trying to do that, but you're nutritionally very depleted, you're already going to be in stress mode all the time. Like, your body's struggling to just get oxygen around for people, that have low iron, for example. So, yeah.
That was really, even with that was really insightful. Like, subhanAllah, I never really thought of it in that manner where you're kind of tying in, science and your expertise with, for example, why, it's
that's
2
my
o'clock
favorite part.
in the morning and stuff. That's actually pretty mind-blowing. I've never had that. That's what I mean. Like, when we incorporate these sort of sciences, you kind of have a totally different perspective of things that you wouldn't have envisioned. And even like, just to add to what you were saying previously, in terms of, always being in stress and stuff. And you also mentioned the 6 lifestyle factors, which we can get get into deeper a bit later, but how you're saying a lot earlier that things like the rays and the rays, the blue lights and stuff that we have to encounter may affect maybe patterns in our body to the sort of food that we eat, that we don't get the right nutrients enough in order to function, and so we're always on stress, and these play like a sort of flow-on effect into compounding into a sort of medical issue. And it's about sort of addressing that core, and perhaps even the lifestyles we live isn't sort of conducive for our body to be at its optimum. But also to add to that, like you're talking about being present in the moment, and just people undergoing stress, and to add to, I guess, the four temperaments lens onto it, I assume like when you do get a patient or a client like that undergoing that sort of stress, you can sort of also apply the four temperaments and further pinpoint the exact sort of specifics. Like for example, like I guess people can we've done episodes in the past in terms of specifically and going deeper, but just to give a quick rundown, like I guess for example, a phlegmatic type will overthink situations and will be more prone to anxiety. Melancholics may be prone to, what Muhammad Ishaq taught us is melancholics will be prone to depression because of setting high standards and not meeting those standards. So like when you can kind of pinpoint, I guess, the temperaments of each people, then you can even go deeper into the kind of psychology and how they perceive things. Because like I assume like for a phlegmatic, it'll be way easier to sort of pick up that, that stress maybe stem from overthinking certain situations they're in, and kind of putting themselves into that stress. So then when you pinpoint that, for example, you know that, okay, this guy needs to learn to be present in the moment. That kind of ties in with the prayer and all that, and that's a good indicator for if you're stressed or not. That's, I guess, that could be used for everyone that's phlegmatic. So would you say, like, do you have that sort of I guess approach when it comes to treating people for things such as stress, and kind of further sort of delving deeper into the sort of issues, I guess?
So like I said, like how my practice changed once I brought temperaments a lot more into my consideration for the client. So like you said, like different temperaments will be more inclined towards different things, and so everyone has that ability to stress, but it will be for a different reason, like you were saying. So so I wouldn't actually, like, for example, I just need to know as a naturopath where it's coming from, so I know how and what to treat them with and where to direct them. So I don't do a lot of like counseling in terms of like psychology, but obviously as a naturopath, and my consultations are quite long, there is an element to that, but I always like to direct them to a psychologist, like if they need to. It's like, well, if they do have anxiety, or if they do have depression, or even some people, it's not even anxiety or depression, it's maybe like self-esteem, like for some sanguines, it might be like, they have an issue with self-esteem that's causing them to behave a certain way. And for me, it's like, I can understand it. It's like, okay, it's not like, it's like, why is this person having anxiety when, they shouldn't? And then we kind of go into that to see where I can help them in terms of either pointing them towards a psychologist, or is it because they have a lot of nutritional deficiencies that's, making them more stressed out, or is it, the overthinking, also that, or that perfection, being like a perfectionist with the melancholic, do they need to talk to someone about that? So me personally, I wouldn't go into it too much. I mean, I've had clients who say to me, oh, I don't need to see a psychologist, I've got you. But I still push them towards a psychologist, because I think there is a stigma attached, which is also going, but that stigma attached to a psychologist. And the thing is, it's a science as well. It's like a healing science as well, that, I don't see a problem, and I don't see a problem with someone saying that it doesn't mean, it shouldn't mean anything if you see a psychologist. They've got studies also, they've done the research, they've done the work. It helps people, especially in a time where society is so disconnected. psychologists almost help you to, I guess, be that extra E, but except they're professional. So the advice that they give you is something that's already been used in the past and, proven to be effective. But yeah, so going back to your question, I do go into it. I do see where it's stemming from, because that's really, really important in my practice to see where it's coming from. And then either treating them for it myself with also with there's herbs as well that help to deal with things that doesn't get to the extreme of, like, for example, antidepressant, but it can make you feel better. And my clients with anxiety, they will be on the herbs, but I'm always telling them, but you still need to see a psychologist, because people can, the way the brain works as well is, if you keep thinking a certain pattern, that is going to reinforce that way of thinking. And then you need to untrain the brain with that way of thinking. So I could give you the herbs, but if you continually think in that pattern, as soon as you don't have the herbs, you're still going to think like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's I guess it's about, because a lot of, I guess, the physical issues that occur stem from a sort of what do you call it, not a non-physical kind of source, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess it's about adjusting that specifically. I wanted to also ask, in terms of herbs, what role do they sort of have? Because some people will be like, herbs just sound like, medication anyway. So like, what's the sort of difference?
What's the difference? Okay, so with herbs, obviously they're more closer to nature. So because they're more closer to nature, they're not just a one function thing. Like, they have multiple function. Like, one herb will have multiple functions. So for example, olive leaf, it will have 3 functions and it's all got to do with the heart. For example, it will help you to manage the blood pressure. It helps to lower cholesterol, and also the beat of the heart. So it also helps to control that. So it does a few things, just the one herb, and it's because it's not just one chemical. It's actually suited for our body. So I guess I remember one example that, for example, if we were to, aspirin. So aspirin is made from a tree, the willow tree, Salix alba. It's one chemical so it's a salicylate, which is derived from that tree. So with the aspirin, it is in the form that it needs to be from when you take it as the pill, okay? And that's why we see problems with the bleeding in the stomach when you take aspirin. But for example, if you need it, that a little bleeding in the blood, a little bleeding in the stomach, it's going to be okay, considering what it's doing in a bigger aspect of saving your life. Or let's say, for example, someone that needs it for thinning their blood, and they have heart issues, and then let's say they're taking aspirin, or for whatever reason where they need to have blood thinners, where if their blood congeals or is too thick, it can cause a heart attack or a stroke or anything like that. So while that's very important, we've got this Salix alba, when you take it as a herb, it hasn't been broken down to salicylate yet in the stomach, and it's still in a form where the stomach is able to handle it. And then when it gets to the intestines and it meets other chemicals enzymes that break it down into the form it needs to be, by that time the environment of the stomach and the intestines, the pH levels are different, that it can handle that salicylate without causing any bleeding, for example, on the lining. It is now in the form that environment can handle. So you can see like how when it's naturally occurring, how it's more suited to our body. And when it's not, then that's when we have that side effect, which we need to know what the side effects are so we can know whether, it is something that we need to use or not, like if the benefits outweigh the risk, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I know this may relate to what you were just mentioning now, but in the workshop you also mentioned how the body sort of works to balance itself, the physical body.
Yeah.
Would you be able to expand on that a bit more?
Yeah. So, okay. So this is a very interesting one. So the body has its system, right? And there's different parts will have a different system going on. It's a different environment. Let's say the environment in the stomach, environment in the intestines, environment in the lungs, environment in the brain, the blood environment, and then even within each cell, the environment within each cell, it has an optimum environment of how the environment needs to be for everything to function well. So when there's a disturbance in that balance, a lot of the body will change to help reestablish balance, and it can do that, and it's able to do that with all the. So let's say you might be a little unwell for that time where it's still reestablishing balance, but it can manage to build a response to reestablish balance. But we put things in our diet or our lifestyle that can slow this down, or even prolong it, or even like prolong it to a point where then we find more other issues, more imbalances come in, and then it becomes too complicated to leave the body to just, deal with it. But I think also in terms of reestablishing balance, so for example, we have the immune system, okay, that will do things if there is a foreign invader or if there is a pathogen, okay, that invades the environment. It will try to kill that off and things like that, and then new white blood cells will be made, and things like to reestablish that balance when the old ones that have been fighting, when they've died and gotten rid of, new ones will come. So let me think of an example of where balance. So let's say, I guess maybe in the stomach. All right. So in the stomach, I'll use this example. So in the stomach, we've got the enzymes and the acids that line the stomach. And let's say somebody is, there's a certain amount of water that we need to drink a day to make sure that the rest of the cells are getting enough water. But it obviously has to come through our stomach. But let's say in the stomach we're stressed and the muscles are clenched. The acids and the enzymes are not going to be released. And inside the stomach, there is a certain pH that the stomach needs to be at. And if the acid levels are not there, then it's not going to be optimum environment for the stomach to break down the food, yeah? So the body will not create that feeling of thirst, because if you were to drink water, you're going to dilute that pH even more. So you will not get
that's
thirsty.
Very fascinating.
Yeah. So that's so the body knows, okay, this stomach environment is not good it doesn't have enough acid. And if they eat at this level, it's not going to be broken down properly. And if we add water, it's going to dilute that as well. It's going to be an issue. I mean, this is something that is like chronic. Yeah, if someone is chronically has a gut issue, then, because if it's just something slight, the body will, like I said, reestablish that balance by producing more acid or whatever it needs to do. And so the person won't feel thirsty. But if this person goes through this for a long period of time, the rest of the body will be dehydrated, and then it will show signs and symptoms of dehydration, which then should tell the person. Then the person kind of has to understand through the other symptoms that they need water. And generally those people will say to me, once they get to that level of dehydration, and I ask them how much water they drink, they go, I don't like water, but I will have juice, or I will drink, they will drink other things, but not water, because of the pH of the water. They don't know that, but I know that, because of the pH of the water. So they will have other types of drinks that have electrolytes, or that can suit the pH, and it won't dilute the pH in the stomach as much as water would. So that's when I tell them, well, you do need to change that pH of that water, for example, to make it, add a drop of lemon or add the apple cider vinegar or something that will make it easier for the stomach to absorb that water. But you can't ignore it, and you can't be going to, for example, sugary drinks to have that liquid intake, that water intake. So that's one example of just like how the body kind of just tries to reestablish itself. Another one is like the liver. I actually had this client. It was this client. She was an older lady. She was probably about 45 or something like that. Yeah. So she had come to me with liver issues, and we got her to do a ultrasound, and then we found that she actually had a blocked vein, which is so important in the liver. She had a blocked vein in the liver, but the body had created new blood vessels for things to go through. So there was so much new vessels to counteract that blocked vein. So even though she had these issues, for that vein to be blocked, if the body hadn't created those other vessels, she could die. You know what I mean? Like she would have had very high toxicity levels, and although her symptoms weren't even dramatic, it wasn't even that bad in terms of her symptoms because the body had created other ways. So it's subhanAllah, like this is how we say like the body will, another thing is the body will communicate to you with the signs and the symptoms for you to do something about it when it can't deal with the imbalance, so that you can do something because it's not managing on its own. So there'll be things that it will manage on its own and you probably won't even notice. Wow. But then when it gets further, it will have signs and symptoms so that you can do something about it.
That's actually, subhanAllah, that's very, very, very insightful. Like that example kind of, even with the water example, just to add to that, like two things I want to add. Firstly, I know you talked about this on the workshop that certain temperament types will vary in the water they need because, phlegmatic type is a water type already, so they don't need as much water and stuff like that. But on top of that as well, because I know even with water, like people say, and this is me as the dummy in anything to do with medicine or medical related stuff, people are like, oh, if you have like more yellow urine, it means that you have less water, or I don't know if you have like, I think there's also like cloudy urine, which is also problematic. Could you also go into that? Does that also tie into what you're giving the example? Does that tie into the example you give with the water? Yep.
Yeah. So for example, if they don't have enough water, then they'll have like more concentrated urine, and so that should be an indication, okay, I need to drink more water. But just going also with balance and the temperaments, how you brought up, like certain temperaments need more water. So for example, a choleric, because they have more heat, then naturally they would need more water, right?
Yep.
But I'll have some clients that are choleric and don't drink much water, so I'll investigate further, and what we find is that they've got, because choleric is a hot temperament, but for their temperament, they've got not enough heat. They've got too much cold. So they won't want water. So the cholerics that have too much cold, they don't drink as much as the cholerics who have too much heat. And again, that's the body knowing not to drink enough water, not to drink as much water, or not wanting as much water because it can't deal because of the excessive coldness for what its temperament should be.
And what does that extra coldness indicate? Like specifically for a choleric? Because I'm thinking of someone in my family right now. So what is that like? If you're too cold as a choleric, is that an imbalance?
Yeah. So I would say cholerics that are too cold, it generally stems from a nutritional imbalance, like as in nutritionally they're probably depleted on a lot of nutrients, and then the body isn't able to function as well, and then it creates that coldness within them. Yeah, but then they'll have other symptoms as well of, like, for example, a cleric having cold hands and feet. That's very strange,
And I know also in the workshop you mentioned about wet food and hot food.
Yeah.
Does that also tie into this?
Yeah, so every food has its qualities, right? Whether it's more heating or more cold. So a choleric, for example, that has too much cold, they would need more warming foods. Whereas a choleric who has too much heat, anything hot will exacerbate all their symptoms and make everything
Mm.
worse. But yeah, so sometimes I find some clients, it depends on your vitality. If your vitality is strong, your body will communicate the symptoms much easier in terms of like you'll actually crave the foods that you need. So some people can actually naturally just crave what they need. Like they'll come to see me and they're like, oh, I really like ginger and I really like ginger tea. And I know that. And then from when I go through their health history, I see, well, they've got too much coldness, and it's amazing how that their body has already indicated to them that they need more heating foods. And they will have like an aversion to cold salads. They don't want cold salads. And again, that's someone though that their vitality is strong enough to communicate that. Whereas some people, vitality is like so depleted that no matter what's going on, it doesn't even communicate. Like it doesn't even respond.
And I guess those sort of that vitality and those imbalances that we talked about do occur, and they stem like it kind of stems from the kind of six lifestyle factors.
Yeah, yeah.
And and just to would you be able to elaborate on the six lifestyle, like we sort of touched
Mm.
on diet and stuff, but I know in the
Mm.
workshop you talked there's like other stuff as well. If you could just
Yeah.
elaborate on more
So
on that and how that connects.
yeah, so the six lifestyle factors is something that is kind of like the groundwork or the foundations of a person's health as viewed from anyone of holistic medicine. Um, and so in your modality in holistic medicine, they will have the six lifestyle factors that say that it's going to affect your overall vitality. So your physical activity, how much physical activity you do, how much sleep time and wakeful time you're having, your diet, your nutrition, your mental activity, elimination and retention, and your air and environment. They all play a role in your overall vitality. Just because, like with everything, there is a way that, like, that it's going to. For example, like anything that you get, there is a user manual, right? There is a way to work for it to work well, and that's just the same with us, which we're actually more advanced in any of creation. So our our requirements, although they're important, we are advanced enough to kind of not do things so well. Like, let's say you don't have to get things perfect because your body can reestablish that balance, but you need to put some effort in and it will work all together.
And also, would you say that certain temperament types can be lax in some, like, because I think one of them was one of the lifestyle factors is like the environment, like the air, like being closer
Yeah.
to nature, that also has an effect. So would
Yeah.
you say like certain temperament types can be lax in certain lifestyle factors and sort of need a focus on others to make sure they're always in that sort of balanced environment for their
Mm,
body to be at their optimum? Like, just to give it a quick example, maybe because a phlegmatic, because as you mentioned in the workshop, they tend to want to sleep more because
mm,
they're a bit more easygoing, and that kind of relates to the slowness of the digestion, for
mm,
example, as well. So
mm,
then perhaps with that extra sleep that they may enjoy, they don't have to be as, I don't know, stricter on the diet, for example, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. So I would say, okay, so there is like a lot of connections. So, okay, for example, let's say, I don't know why, someone mentioned to me that I always like to use the choleric as an example. I don't know why, but I don't know, maybe it's just more obvious. Everything, all their symptoms are very obvious, and they vocalize everything. So I don't know. But if, for example, with a choleric that has maybe a lot of heat, they will be doing a lot more physical activity. And because they do a lot more physical activity, then their diet and nutrition requirements they need to make sure they have, nutrient dense food. But because they're on the go a lot, then maybe that nutrient dense food needs to be broken down already. Like you wouldn't do lots of meats and stuff like that. Just things that are more easy to digest yet very nutrient dense. But at the same time, it's really important, for example, so in that aspect, that's where you would look for in a choleric, whereas, for example, in melancholic, in terms of diet and nutrition, it's more about where are your emotions at when you're eating, because they're more prone to the irritable bowel, and because I guess that nervous tension of worrying about things being, ideal or perfect, or being, overly cautious. And if they eat in that state, then that creates issues as well. Because like we were talking about earlier, if the stomach is tense, it's not going to release the acids and the enzymes as much as it's required. And then when you do eat in that state, then the food isn't broken down so well. And if the food is not broken down, because at each stage of digestion, there's a certain level of breaking down or digesting that needs to be done before it moves on to the next. But when it doesn't happen, then, then that's when we get reactions, and that's when we see, melancholics kind of have more of a tendency towards food sensitivities and food intolerances. So that's another example of how this life will balance kind of affects different temperaments. And there are certain temperaments also that's more prone, the more dry temperaments, the more prone to having constipation. So they need to kind of focus on that elimination a little bit more. Each temperament will need to pay attention to certain aspects of each factor. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's
because it's really great how you kind of incorporate temperaments, because we can even specify even more directly in terms of what they need to focus on. Like I assume, you also mentioned this in the workshop that we also mentioned it here, for example, a water type won't need to actually drink as much water as we think, guess in the media or in science, or what we've been taught. Maybe, I don't know if in science, but I know we've always been told, growing up in high school and, primary school and stuff, or all of us, just drink 2 liters. I was literally it was funny because in the workshop you talked about that, you touched on that, and me and my sister, my mom really kind of make sure we always drinking water and stuff like that. But then, and the 2 liter number, so then everyone in our family is trying to hit that 2 liters. Yeah. Because even specifically during Ramadan as well. And then you told me, actually it's not the case. It's not necessarily the fact that, this, it's a one size fits all. And I don't know if science addresses that specifically as well. But would you say, would you be able to elaborate more on that as well?
Well, I guess, the funny thing with water intake is because doctors don't even address it. This is nothing. I really appreciate doctors in terms of their studies, because now I'm doing a master's in infection and immune with it's a master's of medicine. So it's I'm in the class with doctors, and it is so hard. It's so intense, and it makes me understand why they're not going to sit, after all those years of intense studying, they're not going to sit there and talk about your water intake, or talk about your little gas issue, in your stomach. It's I didn't do all these studies to just sit here with you and talk about water intake, but
10 years of research just to talk about water.
That's what I like. And I guess that's probably why they look down on us naturopaths. Okay, you go sit there and talk about your water intake, because we've got more serious things to be talking about. With water intake, even as a naturopath, we were taught 2 liters. We were actually given this formula. So this is as a naturopath that studied at a university, because it's water wasn't even addressed properly in modern medicine. So at least we're kind of addressing water, at least we're actually talking about this 2 liters of water. But then when you go into temperaments, it's wait a second, okay, let's get really individual approach with every person. It's well, some people will need much more water because they use much more water. And I guess if you just look at a person, if you're not knowing their temperament, you won't know how much water they use. Like as a practitioner, you can't judge a person and say, oh, it looks like you sweat more, or it looks like, or you know, they won't know. How are you going to know as a practitioner who needs more water? So how are you going to give that to them as a treatment plan? But when you know that someone's temperament is, you know, for example, one of the warmer temperaments, we're going to know that they need more water. Or if someone's of a cooler temperament, then because water is cooling in nature, then they're not going to need as much water. Unless, for example, they're melancholic because they're dry in temperament, then they will need more water as well as the cleric, for example. So yeah, like it is individualistic, but then at the same time, if you go further from that, you still have to look at, are they balanced in their temperament, or, you know, they're severely imbalanced? Like, for example, a choleric person who's imbalanced, if they've got too much cold, they're not going to need as much water as a choleric who's got too much heat, for example, because even their patterns of behavior is going to be different. So a choleric who has too much heat is always on the go, you know, always working themselves up or something like that. Whereas a choleric that has, you know, too much cold will actually display, you know, signs of not being so physically active. So it does help. It helps in different ways. So it helps with me understanding not only like how much water they need, but even that what is happening in their body.
And even what was also fascinating is that you also recommended, like, for example, I assume like for a choleric, because they're a more hot temperament, that you would actually, you know, recommend them drinking regular like cold water. And then for a phlegmatic, since they're already like wet and water type, you recommend warm water for them, so then they can sort of, you know, become more on the balance side of things. Like, would you be able to elaborate on that as well?
Yeah. So like we're saying, like every food has its own temperament. And then there is temperaments that is very obvious. Like, so temperaments is either hot, cold, wet, or dry, right? So obviously with warm water on the first degree, it's one of the first things you actually like we were talking about with temperaments, it's what do you experience from it? So when you drink warm water, you're naturally going to feel warmer. And when you drink cold water, you're naturally going to feel colder. So, but even then, like, okay, so that's kind of like a no-brainer, but people don't even think of it because we just live robotically. But it's just, you know, obviously very clear. But even in, you know, like going back to balance and maintaining optimum environment, the body functions best at that, you know, 36.7 temperature. And if a person's circulation is slower, so let's say a phlegmatic person, and their circulation is slower, and so because circulation is slower, then function is slower, oxygen transporting is slower, nutrient going around is slower, then they kind of need something stimulating, not something sedating. So, and warm water, so that warmth of the water will naturally bring the blood to circulate much quicker. So as you drink, as the warm water touches the mucous membranes in the linings and the stomach, that's going to build a just a natural reaction for the blood circulation to come up to the surface. So that's like in itself stimulating, and then that will get, for example, let's say we'll use that the phlegmatic person, a phlegmatic person that has a lot of cold, and then they drink warm water, and the warmth will kind of get that blood flow going inside their digestive system, and then that will improve the digestive system, and it will also help to open up the cells to actually absorb the water better. And so not only are they that circulation going, that water is going to benefit them much more than cold water. So if we kind of look at the opposite way, if they're cold already, their circulation is already slow, they're already and then they're drinking the cold water, that's going, and let's say, for example, they are the type that is anxious, then that cold water will tense the stomach muscles because it decreases blood flow, and then it's just like a domino effect of lots of little things. And if you can just imagine, if that was to happen all the time, the bigger issues that come with that. So it's all about like the little details making a bigger picture. Yeah. So if you understand the person, then you'll understand what they need.
Subhanallah. And even like we're talking about water, but how about, people be like, I know it's a big thing now, like having cold showers. Cold showers. Would you say that using this kind of temperament lens as well, would you say that it's better for a choleric to have a cold shower because it may balance them more, and then for a phlegmatic to stick to like hot showers because they're on the colder side of things? Would you say that is that correlation can be made or not really?
I would say I haven't actually thought too much into it because we've always used the shower in terms of naturopathy as an example for the body's natural homeostasis. Like, for example, we were talking about going into balance. So let's say your body temperature is at 36.5. Then you go into a hot shower. Okay, and it's going in your body temperatures above that 36.5. When you get out of the shower, the body will try to cool itself down. So you've just initiated cooling down. So you will actually get colder. Do you get what I mean? In the moment, you're feeling warmer, but then you will initiate the homeostasis.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like everyone who's usually steps out of the shower is like usually even colder, and they're like, trying to like me personally, I blast the the heater in the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Like right after you have a shower because you get a lot colder.
Yeah. So that's the thing. I haven't heard this from a reliable source. I've just heard this, like as we hear things about, the sunnah of the prophet, like we hear things floating around. So I've heard that at the end of the shower you should use cold water, and just in terms of naturopathy, I've tied it in and I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like where if, at the end of your shower, if you were to just kind of then use cold water, you would have just initiated your body to kind of develop a response to make you warmer. So when you get out, you kind of
interesting.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how reliable that source is, but I've heard it from a few people, and it ties in well. But in terms of temperaments, I'm not sure because I'm thinking of that homeostasis thing. So yeah, I mean, like I guess with baths, like actually sitting in a bath, or let's say, or in a pool, where it's a longer amount of time, then I would definitely say that the cleric won't be going to like, a warm pool or a hot bath. That's obviously, it's not going to be helpful for them. Whereas for a phleg or a melancholic, that would be very helpful. Warm baths would be very helpful for them.
And I assume even with like cleric won't be able to stay too long in a bath. I don't know if it's a thing. Yeah. So they'll be fidgety and stuff, but phlegmatic will be more peaceful. And I think even Muhammad Ishaq talked about, like, he brought the example of a melancholic and a choleric. They went to, what was it?
That salt bath.
Salt bath. I don't know what a salt bath is, but a hot tank. That's it. So they'll come out with two different experiences, right? Like I think. I don't know how I assume the choleric would be like, like really fidgety after and stuff. It's like, I can't stay too long in one position because it's in their nature to be working hard. Sorry, yeah?
Yeah, so I think he was talking about a sanguine choleric and a melancholic phleg. And how do you know how? Because in a salt, those salt tanks, there's a lot of salt, and that's probably more closer to earth, so the melancholic. Whereas, being confined and all that, it's like the opposite for a sanguine cleric. And then initially when their experience of going in there or from there, it's like it was energizing for the melancholic phleg, but it was what did he say about the sanguine cleric? Feeling a bit tired?
I forgot it.
I don't know.
Oh yeah, I think it was tired. Yeah.
And then when the sanguine cleric went with water and air, then they felt energized, whereas the melancholic phleg didn't even go. Yeah. So I guess another thing is, it's like it might be the way you experience it might be like, for example, if it's something, well, I guess like, in that case, it would be like, okay, the melancholic would have felt comforted with, like, it's like the like and like, it's something that
It's
they
in its
constitute.
element essentially.
Yeah, in its element. Yeah, that's the word, in its
Yeah.
element. Whereas sometimes with the other, like with the opposite, it might have been like not in its element, but it would have been good. Maybe it would have taken time to get used to.
Mm.
It's just the initial maybe response. So, yeah.
Yeah, like even in a previous episode, like we talked about kind of like what's interesting because like with what you're doing and stuff and tying it with the four temperaments as well, you kind of pinpoint where, because you also specifically mentioned that it's about establishing balance in your own sort of in who you are, and then kind
Yeah.
of establishing the balance in terms of seeing your opposite and trying to establish the balance in that sense. So like for example, we talked about being in your elements. So for a melancholic, for example, like what we talked about in we did an episode with Mohammed Ishaq and Ahmed Karat from Maidan
Yeah.
Archery. Like
Oh, yeah, I heard that one.
so like in terms of archery, if it's more of a earthy sport, then a
Yeah.
melancholic will be more drawn to archery, so they can do that activity and achieve
Yeah.
that balance. I know, like I took a family member,
Yeah.
and I know they're a melancholic, and they've only been like archery once or twice, and they're always telling me like that's like my second favorite sport now.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, how you've only been like once or twice. I loved it. And I can kind of see the link. It's because of the
Yeah.
temperament, whereas
Yeah.
someone else from a different temperament may be a bit more, like, this is boring or whatever, like a sanguine
Yeah.
maybe. So
Yeah.
I guess it's about finding that you can specify sort of that right element. This ties in with what you're doing, like, the right foods, what you need, and then sort of being in your optimal balance in your own sort of element, and then seeing what you need afterwards. But I also wanted to ask, like, how do you know if you are balanced in your sort of own element? Like, what are things you can kind of how do you know, like, for example, an imbalanced caloric, if you are an imbalanced caloric or an imbalanced sanguine, like how can you kind of
How
make
can you
that
tell?
sort of how can you tell?
Well, I guess so Muhammad Ishaq talks about it from a behavioral perspective. If you remember in part 2, where he has the that sliding scale of each virtue, and if it was extreme to one end, then the balance kind of tips to something that is not
Yeah.
a virtue anymore. So in terms of behavioral, I would say in that way, and then in terms of like the hot, cold, wet, and dry, in a health perspective, it's when we see those health issues pop up. Because, so for example, with the choleric, if they are getting too much inflammation, with a phleg, they will get, the excessive cold will, cause that lots of often cold and flu often, or they'll have that slow metabolism, poor appetite because the circulation is not there. So we know there's an imbalance there. For a sanguine, we might see like skin issues. We might see other. It depends, and then it depends what the reaction, like what they're going through. That will like tell me what is going on. So for a sanguine, they can have too much heat or they can have too much cold, and it would look different. So, okay, let's say so for example, a sanguine that's got too much coldness in them, then they probably will have lots of cold or flus. Or another thing is the body can create that inflammation to bring about a heat. And the way, like as a practitioner, how I would know that is how does their body respond in cold, and how does their body respond in heat, like for example in winter and in summer. So I'll give you an example of a client that has eczema, a sanguine client with eczema in winter. So a sanguine client will have that has too much cold. In winter, their eczema will get worse because that's going to bring, if the eczema was coming about because of that too much cold, it will get worse in the cold. And then it almost like goes in the summer. They don't have it in summer. Whereas a choleric, they can get eczema too, but their eczema is more of a kind of a release of heat. So their eczema might come worse in summer rather than in winter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does that sort of mean that for a cleric that has eczema in summer, that they would have to have cold foods to kind of balance that? Like how do you treat that?
So I don't just use like temperaments in clinics. I use a lot of it's very broad approach. So for example, I look at everything. And like that's why I like that idea of don't just look at one piece of the puzzle, because when you get as much pieces of the puzzle as possible, you're able to pinpoint much more of what's going on. So, for example, a choleric that has eczema and gets worse in summer, then we address their food. We address, okay, the immune system, what's happening with the immune system, why isn't it able to control that inflammation? So is there a nutrient deficiency? And then we look topically as well, is their skin dry? Because, also, the quality of choleric is hot and dry. So the dryness can also lead to skin dryness will break the barriers of the skin, protective barriers of the skin, and cause that brokenness, and then it can cause the spread of infection, because we have bacteria on our skin, and once the skin breaks, the protective barrier is gone, and infection is more likely. And then even the temperature. So we would actually tell a choleric to, a lot of cholerics with too much heat will do a lot of exercise. And so I'm thinking of one client of mine who's choleric, and she's got eczema, and it gets worse in summer, and she's always doing exercise. So I have to tell her, make sure you're exercising in aircon, with air conditioner. As soon as you finish exercising, you need to have a shower, and you need to moisturize straight away. Things like that, and drinking lots of water. And I actually don't, like this client that I'm thinking of, I don't have to tell her about water. She doesn't stop drinking water. Like, she's one person that has like a 2-liter bottle, a huge water bottle. For years she's been doing this, and she keeps refilling. Like, it's not like she drinks 1-2 liter and that's it. She keeps refilling. So that she has that natural inclination already to want to drink more water. So for me, I can see already there's an excess of heat, because the amount of water she drinks is just like crazy. So already I can see there's too much heat there. And then the eczema coming worse in summer. So it's that you can't deal with the heat almost.
And is eczema sort of like, is that sort of ways approaches you take, like different approaches, be it like summer, winter, for different temperaments, in order to sort of treat eczema? Like, does eczema essentially go away, or you just kind of mitigating the sort of effects as much as possible?
Okay, so it depends how you got it, when you got it. Like, for example, some people get it from when they're a child, so that's been there for a lot longer, so treatment's going to take a lot longer. But I've also had like a client who's older, and she's got very good diet and everything, and it just kind of suddenly came on, and we were able to get rid of it really quickly, because it was something new. So it wasn't a complex issue. It hadn't become a complex issue yet. And once we changed her diet a little bit, and that's the thing, she already had a relatively good diet, but there are certain things, again, it goes back to stress. Over a period of time, she was under a lot of stress, and her digestive system changed, where now she's responding and reacting to things she was never responding and reacting to before, like, gluten and dairy, sugar, making the immune system much more inflammatory, feeding the inflammation. So like I said, it's very hard to answer that question, because everyone is different. So, but yeah, so it's not a one size fits all. If that's what you're asking with eczema, it's different approaches to each person. Even a choleric person with eczema, 2 choleric people with eczema, it still can be different treatments. There will be some similarities. With most of the eczema clients, there'll be some similarities, because it is overreaction of the immune system. But in terms of where did it stem from, the root cause, and what we have to address is different.
And what would you say, like, general practitioners, or like, I guess, science's approach to, because what it seems like, I don't know what, like, you could probably elaborate more what are they doing, because it seems like maybe perhaps they're doing a one size fits all approach, and what you're doing is clearly kind of breaking personalities down, seasons down, different approaches in this season, that season. So it's a lot more like, it seems like you're just kind of getting to the nitty-gritty specifics, which is very fascinating, right? But what would you say, like, science or general practitioners' approach to stuff like eczema? Because it does seem like more general, because I know like someone that I know in my family, they've had eczema, so I think like that's why I have a sort of a bit of a more understanding. So
so with eczema, one of the first things they do is they give a type of steroid cream. And if that steroid cream, that percentage doesn't work, then they'll give you a high percentage. And if that percentage doesn't work, they'll give a stronger cream. And that's really it. Until it gets infected, then you get an antibiotics, and then that's when they'll tell you it will never go. But there are I've met an integrative doctor who he did some studies on vitamin D for eczema, and he also did a study on a certain strain of probiotics for eczema as well. So but this is someone who had a GP who became a pediatrician, who then went further and did some integrative studies, and then actually published, journal articles about this. And majority of GPs, they don't know about those, or I would have to say, they don't know about it, because they do go by study. And if your own colleague has done a study and produced these results, then if you knew about it, you would use it. You'd think you'd use it. So from my explanation, if they don't use it, then that means they don't know about it. But so the reason, if you look into the studies of, let's say, vitamin D aspect, this is again, like I said, this is not the common thing. This is a doctor that's went out and, done a study. But if you look at vitamin D, it's an immune watchdog that controls inflammation. So eczema is from the immune system that, the inflammation is kind of gone a bit over the top and, overreacting. And then if you look at him doing the study on the probiotics and how it's helped, then obviously that eczema has the element of something from the gut as well, then from the digestive system. So from those two studies, you can see that, but that is not the normal doctor's approach to it. And so, the normal approach would just be that steroid cream, and it just gets higher and higher in percentage. And if it still doesn't go, then, and then they will, I guess, again, there's different types of doctors, just like with each practitioner, there's different types. They might suggest an allergy test, because, that can make it worse. But the difference, I guess, is as a naturopath, we're taught to look at where did it come from and address the root cause. Whereas as a doctor, it's like, okay, stop this thing. What's the body doing too much of? It's doing too much inflammation, doing too much overreacting. All right, let's stop the inflammation. Whereas a naturopath perspective is like, okay, there is an excess of overreacting. Why is it overreacting? And let's address the reason why it's overreacting, as well as managing that inflammation.
It seems like what you just mentioned at the end in terms of the why, it just reminds me a lot of in the workshops you talk about why are you here, even in Islam, why are you doing this action, why are you here. It's kind of like incorporating a sort of spiritual kind of element of asking the whys is crucial, right? And I guess I'm not saying that the doctors and GPs don't do that. They want to help you and all that, but it's like, it seems like the holistic approach is to the why seems to be perhaps what you're sort of doing at the moment, which is relating back to the sort of 6 lifestyle factors and seeing that, okay, why is this occurring? It's because of this and that, and just kind of pinpointing the why back to the root cause, which I think it does seem like the modern medicine and stuff is just more about treating, okay, this, I don't know, headache's actually a good example. I might ask you about that. Like, I don't know, a headache is occurring, just take Panadol, right? And you'll go away. Like, speaking on, I brought up headaches. Would headaches sort of relate to, would different temperaments experience even headaches differently and stuff like that? Like, what's your sort of take on, because I remember you brought it up at one point. I can't remember if it was the Instagram live or if it was in the workshop. But
about headache. Okay. I just wanted to point, just going back a little bit about that, the why.
Sorry, I went to a random topic, but
just wanted to point out doctors will ask why. They will investigate.
Of course.
Until they know the reason. But it's just like, if we kind of look at the whole development of disease, like I said, they've done like all these years of study for more serious issues, like to save lives. So their whys are going to be like, we need to stop infection, we need to make sure that the person's not going to die, we make sure the inflammatory markers are not going too high, all the things that can happen on the extreme. But before that time, it's all this prevention that we can do. And that's where that's why I guess the naturopaths or any kind of functional medicine practitioner or holistic health practitioner, it's all about the time before we get to that stage. So I feel like every practitioner has a role to play in the whole spectrum of the progression of disease. So from wellness, okay, you need to just, number one, know how to look after yourself as a human, what you need, what your needs are. And a lot of people don't even know that, just to maintain wellness. How do I just maintain wellness? And then from maintaining wellness, when something is to happen, it slowly progresses. And then we need to go, that's when as a naturopath, you'd go back and like, okay, in the maintaining wellness, what have they not been doing? Or has it progressed even to a little bit more complicated where we need to bring in, the vitamins and the herbs and more extreme diet changes. But then when it gets to the more serious issues, I guess now it comes to the point where the doctor would be like, okay, we need to save this person's life now. It's too extreme. We need to do something stronger. I think like if we look at that model, with everyone having a role to play and understanding there's different levels of health and disease, then I feel like that is a very clear model and of an understanding of why the doctors respond in the way they react to they do with their treatment plan, why the naturopaths do the way they treat, because we're looking at different parts of the health. When you're already diseased, and that's so then you just have to stop that disease and then bring your body back down to a state where we can use preventative care and things like that. So that's in terms of the whys, but it's a very big issue because it's much more when they come to see us, it's much more closer to maintaining wellness, than someone who's already, very, very diseased, where they're kind of, at the risk of losing life or losing an organ or losing, something much more bigger. So like, I'm not against pharmaceutical medication at all. It's just using it at the time when you need it and at the level. So you have to be very aware of what level of health you're at. And then once you get back into a stable condition, then making sure that, maintaining wellness and doing all of that is paramount and very and focused on. And then moving along to your question with the headaches. Headaches is something that has so many factors. Like there's different types of headaches. And then if you can't find the reason why, then it's idiopathic, because the brain is very sensitive to changes, even because it's such an important organ. Slight changes in electrolytes, slight changes in water, for example, dehydration, slight changes in just oxygen supply, for example, can be something as small as, tight neck and shoulder muscles, it's going to cause a headache. So each temperament can have a headache, but I would say there is like, if we're going by headaches due to food sensitivities or headaches due to not enough water or headaches due to that tight muscles, I would say that like melancholics are more prone to it. But again, like I said, all temperaments can get it, but I would say melancholics are more prone.
Okay. And because I know like people, for example, might have migraines as well. And would that sort of relate to maybe, would you use like the kind of, the 6 lifestyle factors in order to sort of, pinpoint, why that sort of migraine, for example, may be occurring? I don't know, like as you mentioned, maybe lack of water, but would there be like any other sort of reasons potentially as well?
Yeah. So with a migraine, I would always err on the side of caution, because like brain is an important organ, like we said. So I would, number one, first keep a diary. And if it is like extreme, then going for the scan. And some people like again, like some people can talk about the dangers of having a scan, but I would say there's a higher risk there of not doing a scan. So do the scan, and we can deal with the side effects of a scan later. Do the scan, find out, make sure, rule out any more kind of serious issues. And if you've ruled out no serious issues, then that's when that 6 lifestyle factors would be absolutely important in trying to address. But I guess another thing is that diet and nutrition would play a major role. If you've addressed all the 6 lifestyle factors, then going to diet and nutrition, because food intolerances, like I see in clinic, food intolerances is a major thing when it comes to headaches. Like I have so many clients, like every client basically that has come in saying that they have headaches every day, like weekly, they've got, a few times a week they get headaches. When we change their diet, they don't get those headaches.
Interesting. Well,
yeah.
And I guess even, would you say like, what's the kind of general practitioner's approach to, dealing with headaches? Is it just more like, just take Nurofen and Panadol and all that, and that's that? Or they also, I assume they're also addressing, drink more water, obviously, but like, what's their sort of angle to it?
Well, I would say from my experience of like my clients that have seen doctors for it, they would address, like, so a good practitioner, general practitioner would go and do the scans, find the reasons, check the hormones, like there are certain, like prolactin, so there are certain markers in the blood as well that can kind of point towards reasons of why you could be getting migraines or headaches. Because as a naturopath or functional or any other functional practitioner, they would also go into other hormones to check, if there's hormone imbalances, because that can also be a factor. But yeah, with the GP, I would say they would do all those investigations. They would do all the scans, do the blood tests, check the scans, check the blood tests. If they can't find the reason why, then they're going to just give you that medication and say it's idiopathic, which means there is no reason why. There's no known cause. And I hate that word idiopathic.
Yeah, that's interesting because like,
reason for me. There is a reason, you just don't know the reason.
Because it reminds me, like, I guess what you mentioned, I think it was a beginning of the workshop. I can't even remember. I think it was in Instagram Live. It was like, no, you were talking about why you got into naturopathy and stuff. And one of the ones you said is like, Allah says, there's for every disease, there's a cure. So then I guess technically speaking from a Muslim perspective, there's no such thing as there's no cure.
Yeah.
Like there has to be a cure, right?
Yeah, that's what I wonder. Like I really want to talk to some Muslim doctors, because I wonder if they use that line too, knowing that as a Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that there is a cure. And you hear it coming out of doctors' mouths saying, so there is no cure. So as a Muslim, when you believe there is a cure, how can you say there is no cure? And so it's, okay, if you were, and okay, like, so for me, that sometimes like that just plays on my mind, like how can a Muslim doctor, knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that there is a cure, actually say there is no cure? Like how does that sit within them, like in their beliefs? That kind of boggles my mind. But so like I said, there is always a reason, like 1 + 1 always equals 2. 2 doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. Nothing happens just for no reason. If you don't know it, then you don't know it. It doesn't mean it's not there. There's a very, very big difference, and it ties in. That's another thing. It's in our Islamic tradition. Like in our Islamic tradition, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us there's a means and there's a cause of asbab, right? And even like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do anything, but even if, with him, he can do anything with he doesn't need a means, a cause, right? He can just make anything happen. But even he has established this life for us, or this world for us, with causes. This is a world of, cause and means. So, and like he's like, we're taught just because you can't hear or see it, it doesn't mean it's not there. That's heavily rooted in our Islamic tradition. So yeah, sometimes I just wonder I haven't actually, I would really like to speak to a Muslim doctor and see what their take is on that line. There is like, okay, where's the cure then?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess even for Muslim like I assume some of them just sort of say it, but they say it like that. What they imply is like we actually haven't figured it out yet, kind of thing. But at the same time, it's like just to be like it was a good insight that you mentioned, and for the audience and for myself as well. Like when you have like an illness or a sickness, it just didn't come out of thin air, right? There's some causes before that, so it's about kind of realizing that as well. So sometimes it's a good thing to just be mindful of that. If you do have a sickness, and I'm not saying for everyone. I guess someone was born with certain disorder and all that, obviously, but I'm saying like things that just can't kind of happen over time, and then you have this big illness. It's probably stemmed from somewhere, so it's always self-reflective. So it does. It's really interesting because it just literally stems back to what you were mentioning about the 6 lifestyle factors. Just being mindful of that, diet, sleep, and everything else, environment, even stress levels, and you when elaborated on like the kind of physical manifestations of that, even for different temperaments, like all these things. I guess it's just to be mindful of, and it was pretty interesting as well. Even with the earlier point that you mentioned with one of your clients or patients that. They had different kind of, was it blood vessels that open up
and the
over time? And that's what I mean. Like these things are just something that we should be aware of. That we if something happens, and even Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says that there's a cure for everything. There's literally a cure for everything. And I guess that's sort of for skeptics as well. It's just to be mindful of. It's good to be aware of different kind of frameworks and systems as well, because it doesn't necessarily mean like the purely kind of materialistic sort of worldview is a sort of cure for X issues, for example. So I guess it kind of that sort of ties in as well. In terms of, I guess, what I wanted to ask is, I know I remember in the Instagram live you did with Muhammad Ishaq, you actually talked about that sort of, and you also mentioned it now, like for example, the diet that we have and the sort of society that we live in, and versus the society that we lived in the past. So for example, in the past, in the olden days, and probably because my background is Bangladeshi, so I assume my grandparents or my great grandparents living in more the villages of Bangladesh, where when there was food, it's like wholesome, proper food in the sense of the rice, and it's clean and all that. There's no pollution in the air, etc., etc. So they're probably getting more nutrients into the body because it's more natural, obviously, and they don't have to deal with chemicals. And just in naturally, if you have producers and consume and the shops dealing with all this food, it does level, I guess, of what can you say, like contamination kind of gets in the way. So you don't have that if, I guess, you have great grandparents living in the villages, so their diets would be more gaining those more vital nutrients compared to probably now. And one of the examples you talked about is milk. And milk is an interesting example, because why I want to speak about that is because we did an episode with Sheikh Hassan locally, and also with Jeff Lawton, who's a very famous permaculturist from Zaytuna Farm. So we actually talked about milk on that, and I know you have a very good, interesting perspective as well. But just from the perspective of someone like Jeff Lawton, what he mentioned is with milk, we kind of made that comparison from milk of the past versus now. Like now it's you have to pasteurize it and all that, and what they're doing is shooting it with what do you call it, chemicals. Even how the cows are treated is like, this is I kind of, to boil down to, there's no sort of baraka. And what he compared is like the milk from the old of like what he gave example of was the Arabs of old, like during the time of Rasulullah, they'd leave the milk out in the sun and it will turn into yogurt, for example, and that's what they could have. And if you flash forward to now, that's almost unthinkable. Like if you leave like milk out in the sun, it's going to be like,
bacteria in
yeah. So I guess what he's trying to say is like milk was literally like alive back then compared to the
there.
milk. It's like dead milk what we're having now. And then
Yeah.
Sheikh Hassan kind of went into the baraka aspect as well, right? Like treating the cow right and those sort of responsibilities we have. And unfortunately, like I've seen videos like of it was pretty heartbreaking seeing cows with like, you can see they're like genetically enlarged udders.
Yeah.
And one of the heartbreaking videos, and it still haunts me at times. It's like there was like a bunch of like 5-6 cows just walking up a hill, and you could tell their udders are so enlarged, and like it was so heavy, and they were struggling, and it was like hot. And I'm just like Subhanallah, what are we doing, right? And I guess it's not just for milk specifically; it can be like for eggs and how chickens are treated, and meat industry as well, and all that.
Yeah.
But you brought up you were talking about milk as well. So
Yeah.
what's your sort of take on the mass productions of food in this day and age, and I guess the flow-on effect of that to the 6 lifestyle factors? Because I assume in the process you're probably not getting the as much nutrients as you would as milk of the past, and how that kind of perhaps plays a role in certain infections maybe, or even health problems that may arise from having such foods on a regular basis, I guess.
Yeah. So that this is a very like interesting topic. I do workshops, and one of the subjects that we cover is milk, because it's such a big industry in Australia. And there's, I guess, so many layers to it. So from the aspect of just connecting to your food. So if we talk about mindful eating, we've lost that vitality, like you were talking about earlier. So that vitality is lost that we're getting from our food, because it's just so tampered with that, the more closer to nature that, food is, the more vital forces it has within them that can be transported to us, that we absorb from it. But when that is, when so much things have been done to it, like it's dead. And there's a really, really nice poem. I don't know if we'll get time to read it, from Khalil Gibran about mindful eating, and it's so beautiful. And it really, like, for someone like like us who live in this modern day and age where we don't connect to our food, like we don't even know where our food is from. We don't even know what but we don't know where it's come from. Even apples, like even like fruit and vegetables, we still don't know where that's from, let alone the processed foods. So we have like such a disconnect to our foods, which brings I don't even know where to start, because now I'm starting to think of, okay, so if we respect ourselves as a human being, as a person, as a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a member of the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we should understand that our body deserves respect. Okay, number one. So when we know how to respect ourselves, we'll be able to respect the plants and animals around us. We'll be able to appreciate the hard work that farmers, for example, put in. We'll be able to appreciate the life lost of that animal. Like that lamb, that mother lost its lamb. So what did it lose? Why did the mother lose its lamb for? For at what cost? For what reason? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's so Kareem, and He created all of these creation for us humans, right? Because, we are serving a higher purpose. But when we disrespect ourselves, we will disrespect the animals. We will not take into account that, we will not acknowledge that life lost as a lamb or mother, we won't acknowledge the lifestyle or the living environments of the animal. For what reason? But that's one aspect, but that's a whole big other thing. But if we get to, like, let's say milk, I remember when I first became a naturopath, or when I was studying naturopathy, there was a lot of illnesses that they would say, is exacerbated by milk, like asthma and eczema, And now they're starting to say as well, like, dairy is a big hormone disruptor. And they say, what else do they say about milk? Also, a lot of people are lactose intolerant. So then people go to one extreme and say, I'm going vegan. I'm not even touching milk. I'm not touching cheese. And then I remember, like, as a Muslim naturopath, I heard about that hadith to the effect that the Prophet ﷺ said something about milk being shifa. So it made me look into the production of milk. And then I also heard, so there was a lot of things getting, that I was getting fed. So number one was there was milk causing all these health issues. And then there was, but then in the Prophet ﷺ said milk is shifa. And then I also, read somewhere that, some Muslim practitioners were saying they were deriving from that hadith of milk is shifa. They were saying, so if milk is medicine, then what he means is that we only take it in small doses, like medicine is taken in small doses. But when you look at the stories of the Prophet and the times of the Sahaba, that's not how it was taken. So there's like a contradiction there as well. And with his stories of in the times of the Prophet and times like the Sahaba, they would actually have milk as a meal, as a complete meal. And then I looked into the actual composition of milk, and milk has fat, it has protein, and it has carbs. So in essence, it is a complete meal because it has all aspects of macronutrients. And then when you look at the micronutrients in milk as well, you've got so much micronutrients as well. And then you've got, in different types of milk, you could have enzymes, living enzymes, unless it's been heavily homogenized and pasteurized, then you're not going to have anything living in there. But naturally occurring, it has living enzymes and it has bacteria, living bacteria. And if you look at the functions or what those enzymes and bacteria does, it actually helps to digest the fat and the protein in milk. So when that is removed, when the enzymes and the bacteria is removed, then obviously it's going to be harder to digest. Yeah. And then at that time, there was a rise of A2 milk. Like I think just after I left uni, there was this big deal about A2 milk coming into the grocery stores. And so people were saying, oh, no, I don't drink normal milk. I drink A2 milk. It makes my daughter's eczema better and just things like that. So again, I went into the research of looking at milk production in Australia. And it's interesting because all the information is actually there for everyone to see. Like if you wanted to go look it up, it's very easily accessible. It's not even hidden how the production of milk, and it's, all for regulation. And so how they treat the cows. There is actually a page, a website for farmers that are raising the cows on how to, number one, which antibiotics to give your cows so they don't get infections of their udders because of the over milking. So why are they getting so much infections? Okay, so they're giving farmers this information about which antibiotics to use. So why are they using, why are they talking, so why is there a big focus on which antibiotics to use? Because you look at it, because they're getting infections and they're getting pus on their udders. And it's okay, why are they getting that much infection and pus? And then you look at it, it's because they're overdoing the cows. They, like you said, they'll give them specific feed that will yield the most milk. And then they're milking them how many times a day, which is not natural, which is not something that's natural. And for that cow, and then it's creating infection, which is creating pus. And then even if you were to read on the website, it's really actually quite disgusting, where it has a regulation, like in Australia, we have a regulation of what level the pus can be at in the milk, like what quantity is allowed to be present in the milk, what quantity of pus is allowed in the milk. There's a certain level of pus. It's why is there pus in my milk? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Wow.
yeah, and then sorry. So then it's like, and then you look at, so then in that production, in the way that they're raising the cows, there is just a problem there. And then in the proteins, so there's A1 protein in milk, and then or there's A2, or there's both. Sometimes there's just A2. If it's A1, there's always like parts of A2. In A2 proteins, it's generally in cows that haven't been, so Jersey cows, they produce naturally occurring A2 milk proteins only in their milk. And that is a protein that's just naturally easier to digest. So number one, that's one issue with milk, the protein. The other thing is the fact that it's pasteurized and homogenized. There's no more living enzymes and bacteria to help break down the milk. So then now this milk becomes harder to digest. And then the other thing is the feed. So they're not grazing on grass where they're getting more nutrients. So then the nutrient quality or the nutrient content in the milk now is decreased as well. But so going from all of that, someone's going to say, well, now we're supposed to have our own cow and milk our own cow. How's that possible?
Yeah, go back to the desert or something. We have to emigrate.
How are we gonna? Well then, go stay on a farm or something. No, we don't have to do that. And also, again, there's also this other quality of milk that we also need to consider is the fact that naturally it's cold and wet. And subhanAllah, like nowadays, we have to deal with so much terminology when it comes to food production and food. It's not so simple. Back in the day, they were just talking about milk being like, whether it's goat's milk or is it a sheep milk or is it cow's milk, and the fact that it's cold and wet. So, just for a person who is naturally cold and wetter in nature, then, maybe add something heating to it so that it's easier it sits well inside. Sorry. And that's all they had to kind of think about with milk. Obviously, there is that issue with it going off, but they were kind of more in tune and more aware on how to pick up if it's off. Whereas now we're not aware of. We don't know what to do. We're only used to sterilized things. We're only used to being given things that are sterile and ready for consumption. We don't know anything else. But going back to so like I said, there's so many layers with milk. So so if we were to look for milk that is organic, let's say, so that will have a higher nutrient quantity, but it will still have the issue that there is no live enzymes to help break down the protein, and there will still be A1 and A2 protein that will be harder to digest. And for people whose digestive systems who have gone through a lot of stress, they won't have that enzyme lactase to break down the lactose. So milk might still be difficult for them, even if it's organic. And then you'll have A2 milk. A2 milk, it still has lactose. So again, people whose digestive systems are not that great and they don't have that enzyme lactase, that's still going to be harder for them to digest. It's still not going to have the enzymes and bacteria to help break down, and it's not organic, so it doesn't have as high nutrient quantity. And so let's say we go to Jersey cow milk that hasn't been touched with. So let's say it's a Jersey cow that's been fed grass. It hasn't been homogenized and pasteurized. So we've got then the higher nutrient quality because it's having the grass. It's Jersey cow, so it's got the easy to digest proteins. It hasn't been processed so much that there's still got live enzymes and, bacteria that's going to help digest. So that's going to sit well with most people. And then all you're going to have to think about is the fact that it's cold and wet in nature. That's the only aspect they're going to have to address. But then it's illegal to sell raw milk like that in New South Wales. I think it's even in I think it's in most of Australia actually. It's illegal to sell raw cow's milk. So goats, it's not illegal, and sheep and all, camel and all that, you can get that raw, and that's no problem. But
what's the reason for it being illegal?
Illegal because So people have died from the bacteria. So there's been a bacteria that's grown in it, and so they said, okay, it has to be pasteurized. But you kind of also have to kind of look at it like, okay, well, you know, I'm pretty sure there's someone that has died as well from, I guess, the other milks that have had the bacteria in them, or like, and it's probably like improper storage or something that along the way it hasn't been, controlled properly, looked after properly, and that can be with anything, right? But I guess with cow's milk, because it is consumed a lot, and back in the days, I don't know if you remember, but I remember like the milkman used to come and drop off milk.
Yeah.
And I think even back further when we probably were much younger, and I don't even remember, and our parents were in Australia, then they even had glass bottles that would be delivered, like the milkman would deliver milk in these glass bottles. So in those times, there's still like a lot of contamination that can come into play. So now in the market, we actually have, so for me, when I talk to my clients, I say, number one, what is your issue? Number two is try to eliminate the most important issues that are triggering a response or making it harder to digest. So the fact that it's Jersey cow milk and it's A2 proteins, straight away, it's already going to be easier to digest. I wouldn't even say, like, for me, I would say, organic, paying the extra money for organic, but it's still got A2 proteins, A1 proteins, and it's going to be harder to digest, and it's cold and wet. It's not something that is worth it for me. It's like, it's not worth paying that extra money. You would rather just go to Jersey cow milk and get Jersey cow milk, easier to digest, and then look at it. If it's organic, then that will be higher nutrient. And now we've got a cold pressed raw milk that's not illegal, because it has undergone, so it's gone through cold temperatures to kill the bacteria. So it doesn't have any live bacteria, but it still has the live enzymes at least. So it's got the live enzymes, it's got the A2 protein, it's organic, it's from the Jersey cow. So I think, like, in terms of legal milk in Australia, that's probably as good as we're going to get without living on a farm.
Yeah, I guess we just have to sort of find the solution. So I guess what you're saying is, like, it's cost-wise, it's probably not ideal, so just stick to the Jersey cow milk, and I guess you can purchase that from like normal supermarkets and stuff like that, or?
Not so. It's starting to become more widely available, but then we're going to I think we're going to come with face new problems, because with everything, as soon as they have to start making it as mass production, then they leave out the details that could be important. So like, so at the moment now, I think most health food stores and like Harris Farm, they sell, and I've seen it in IGA, the cold pressed raw milk. They've got them. Or unless, like, and then there's also more companies making Jersey cow milk. And again, like, you ask yourself, well, I wonder why there's more, because obviously the demand, there's a demand for it now, or there's a need for it. So in a nutshell, that's milk. But like I said, with the dairy industry in Australia, it's such a big money maker that but because of all the lactose intolerance that's happening, there is also a decline in that industry, and people, other companies making different types of milk. And then people start resorting to, almond milk and soy milk and, oats and rice, because there's the increase to allergy or infection from, allergy or intolerance from dairy. But I wouldn't say that is an alternative. It's not the same. It's not on the same level. Like, you can't compare cow's milk to almond milk. So you can use it as a liquid alternative. For example, having cereal, you need something, you need some sort of milk in there. You could use it as like that, but you can't think that you're getting enough, calcium, or you're getting enough nutrients or that from having almond milk. Like, it's not like the Prophet ﷺ, like going back to what the Prophet ﷺ saying, milk is shifa. Real milk is shifa. Real milk is a complete meal. Real milk has so much nutrients that someone who is convalescing, so someone who is recovering from an illness and can't digest harder to break down food, milk would be a very good at that time. Like maybe adding some herbs so that it's like maybe just some cloves or cardamom or something to kind of give it a bit more heat, or even adding just some honey. It would be so good for someone who's recovering from an illness and they can't eat too heavy foods. And so I think in Australia we just have that problem because of the way it's the mass production.
Yeah, and even just like you mentioned demand, like what milk at one point was like $1. So it's like insane. It's obviously a money making machine, and farmers were affected, and they were having all these kind of campaigns that in the process that farmers are essentially being taken care of because of the corporations that are kind of buying out the milk. It's very competitive, so they have to put down the lower prices lower, or else the companies aren't gonna essentially sell them like Coles and all that. So it's the market's pretty intense in of itself. So I guess it's alhamdulillah, like it was very insightful in the sense that I guess it gives an idea of kind of linking the Islamic side to what's actually happening on the ground, to the nutrients that exist in it and what we can do. Also, like that also reminds me also in terms of I guess the meat industry as well. And this kind of can connect to the 4 temperaments, where I assume obviously the meat that we're having now is not the same as before due to the similar kind of reasonings for for example how milk is processed and all that. At the same time, you also mentioned that meat, I guess, wouldn't, like too much meat for a caloric type probably isn't the best way to go about things, because they're all so like for example a phlegmatic will probably benefit more from having more meat. Could you be able to kind of expand on that? Like I guess the whole kind of meat industry, does it kind of fall into the similar boat as what I guess the milk industry is undergoing, and also perhaps linking it with the 4 temperaments as well?
Okay, so again, so because of the change in production of meat, very similar where the cows or the sheep, they've been, the way they've been treated, and the chickens, how they've been treated, it's going to be very different in terms of quality to the animals that have been treated well, number one. In terms of nutrients. Okay. So number 2 would be, so if we go look at like temperaments, so certain temperaments, so I was mentioning like choleric. So choleric is, hot and dry in nature, and they have an excess of, or their humor is yellow bile. So their body is going to be slightly more acidic, especially in the lifestyle and diet that we kind of live in now. Like if you were, looking at the modern lifestyle and looking at the will balance, if a choleric is depleted in any of those areas, their body is going to be much more prone to being more acidic in nature. And then if they were to have, consume a lot of beef or lamb, then it's going to be much more intense for them. Their inflammation is going to get fed much more quicker, and so it will exacerbate their diseases. Whereas, for example, melancholic requires that protein, requires that meat a lot more, and is able to digest a lot more easier. So in regards to meat, like that mass, but it's not so, I guess, not so many different aspects as milk has. It's more just that vitality is lost, that connection to the animal is lost, or connection to that food is lost, and then the nutrient quality because of their feed. Like, so their feed, again, if you look into the websites that associations for the farmers and information for farmers how to look after your animals, it just talks about their feed, what types of, and it's not even natural feeds. It's just that they've got names of certain types of feeds that's got these blends. So they're all these like supplement type foods. So they're not having like grass, or if they do, it's not that much. Like that's why another thing is in Australia, because we rely heavily on rainfall, because we, especially those times we were going through drought and stuff, it really affected the livestock. Whereas when you look at New Zealand, for example, they have so much rainfall that it actually is cheaper to feed the cows grass. So in Australia, it's cheaper to feed your cows just supplementary type of feed, and it's more expensive to keep water your fields for grass to grow for the cows. So a lot of organic or grass-fed beef and lamb actually come from New Zealand.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I guess, also wanted to add as well, in terms of another question, and this may stem to more what we've talked about previously, in terms of perhaps addictions. So even, and relating that to the 4 temperaments. So are there more like, as in, different types of like, I guess, addictions, and perhaps a certain type of addictions being related to a certain temperament, for example?
Yeah, so we didn't get to cover that in that workshop, but so it's very interesting because you know how cholerics are very like adrenaline junkies. They kind of like to live life on the edge and things like that. That's how they are with their tastes as well. So they like to have like intense taste. So they will crave things that are chili, spicy. They will crave things that are acidic. And then also being like always on the go, they would need stimulants. So they'll want the coffee, they'll want the sugar. And so in a nutshell, like, cholerics, we advise them to kind of monitor that and manage that, because that actually makes their diseases worse. Melancholic can fall into that trap of going for stimulants because they're feeling tired and lethargic. So then they're wanting, something to make them feel better. And then also if they're getting constipated, and then they might feel like, coffee helps them go toilet. And then it becomes a habit. Whereas the other 2 temperaments, I would say like a sanguine is just more into indulging in foods that are just, in good food. So there are diseases that are more, like gout, for example, it's called a rich man's disease, because it's from foods that are too indulgent, I guess. Like, I guess we're Muslim, so we don't drink alcohol, but meat, cheese, and all of that stuff. Someone probably will enjoy those things, and a phleg will crave. So I recently had a phleg. Just yesterday, I had a phleg client that was phlegmatic, and because she's always cold, she just tends to want to have more warming teas. She just wants that warmth. So she will just go lean towards, she'll have, she said, we're having a laugh, she said she has 10 cups of tea a day, although they'll vary in terms of whether it's herbal tea or black tea. And then she'll have 4 cups of coffee. And I'm like, where's the time to fit all those cups in? But she works at a desk in the office, so she's like, well, there's always something there, but it's the fact that she's always cold. She craves that kind of thing. So temperament, I would say, does play a role. But yeah, so with a choleric and melancholic, we advise them not to go for the sugar that that they kind of want that sugar. Not to go for them, because it just makes their conditions worse, and it's not actually getting to the bottom of what they need, because especially like with the choleric, they might want that sugar because they need it because they're starting to get tired, but they've got 101 things to do, and they don't stop. Like especially someone who has excessive heat, they won't want to just sit down and chill, and they need to have the nutrients they need to have the nutrients to fuel that, on the go kind of lifestyle, but sometimes, most of the time, or, sometimes they don't. And then that's when they will turn to caffeine, sugar, and stimulating kind of things. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, I guess, essentially, because each temperament will incline towards doing something specifically, like as you mentioned, sanguine, for example, they may like certain taste for things, so they're more prone to gout and all that, and compared to also like a choleric and what they may endure. So it's about kind of understanding that, and then understanding where, I guess, the addiction is stemming from, and also and sort of working alongside that. And would you say, like, I know another kind of just a random thought, in a lot of people say, like, during Ramadan, they have to give up coffee, and it's like a big struggle. And I know, even like, I was talking to a friend, he was just like, without coffee now, during Ramadan I get headaches all the time.
Yeah.
What's this sort of, is this sort of related to all that? Like, where do you see that connection?
Well, number one, coffee has become an addiction for a lot of people in this type of lifestyle, because it's what gives them the fuel or the energy. So for some people, they'll say, it's the only thing that wakes me up. And the thing is, the body adapts to that. So even people's blood pressures, and that's why they get the headaches, because even physiologically, over years of having coffee, your body adapts to that. So it then starts to depend on that, even like your heart rate and everything like that. So even someone with hypertension, if they're having coffee, their allowance, I guess, for that stimulant is actually like the body accommodates for this caffeine every day, and it's not new. So it's not like it's going to cause the hypertension, because it's already used to that extra stimulant. So that's why people get those withdrawal symptoms of the headaches and things like that, because now the body has adapted to that stimulant, and all of a sudden you're taking it away. But another thing is, some people say it's not even that. Like, it's the fact it's not even about the energy. It becomes, I call it an attachment. Okay, where the body has acknowledged that it makes you feel good, and it has produced those neurotransmitters that has sent the signal we feel good. Like, for example, if it's just even like a cold day and you're having a warm coffee and you're having some alone time, or your body has associated that, or your mind has associated that with all these positive things of making me feel good, and then you develop an attachment that it's almost like an addiction, right? Because the neurotransmitters of what happens when the neurotransmitters that gets made when you become addicted to something, it's pretty much the same thing. When you develop an attachment, it's the same neurotransmitters that form, and you get that high and things like that. But I feel like with Ramadan, that this is our time to break those attachments, because it's not serving you well. Like, you may feel like that it's serving you well at the time, but it's not something that serves you well in the long run, because number one, caffeine stops the absorption of nutrients. So over time, you're going to be depleted, and caffeine puts you on that high alert, that adrenaline phase that we were talking about earlier. And so you're going to be constantly in adrenaline, or in that fight response. And like we spoke about earlier as well, all those systems that, get slowed down when that happens. So you can see all the problems that can occur in the long run with having too much coffee. Like, even with the temperaments that would benefit from some stimulation, I would still say, make sure that it's, freshly roasted coffee, not the instant coffee. And it's, something that is actually, and not too much, like not something that you become addicted to, and and also have it with your body clock, with the time of the rise of the cortisol, have it in line with that, not having a coffee at night. Although obviously there was, like, in history, we know about coffee being from Yemen, and how some Sufi saints used coffee to keep them awake for ibadah, and they have that intention. And there's actually a dua, or an intention around coffee. It's very interesting. I went to a cafe that was run by Muslims, and they had it up on the wall, and there was like a whole dua that a Sufi saint had come up with intentions of having coffee. Like, why are you having coffee? Why are you? And if it's for worship, then even drinking coffee can be an act of ibadah, as long as you're having it in line with helping your body and not making it worse. But another thing, so coffee also has a lot of antioxidants, so it does have health benefits. So a lot of things do have benefits to it, as well as the pros and the cons. But it's just when it's overused or used incorrectly, that's when the problems happen. But yeah, even people have attachments to their identity, or even I know for me personally, I don't drink coffee all the time, but I do like to, when I'm out and let's say with friends or something like that, have a coffee. And I know at that time I'm just thinking, okay, my brain's associating coffee to this good time. Do you know what I mean? Or
interesting. Yeah.
Do you know when I feel like it's a culture in Sydney, especially because our coffee is really good in Sydney. If you go overseas,
there's so many varieties. So many names of coffees, and it's like in America, it's the same. I love the
coffee science. I love the science of coffee and the art to making coffee. It's so interesting. And I feel like Sydney and Melbourne, we've kind of got. Actually, I went to Perth and I went to a cafe in Perth. They made there was one cafe that made it really good. So I guess maybe Australia just makes really good coffee the way they make it, because I've also heard stories about I've been to the UK. The coffee was not like Australia at all.
Yeah, I had some UK listeners. I talked to them offline, who listen to the podcast, and they came to Australia once. They always talk about missing Australia because of the coffee. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, and I've also heard someone was talking about they went to Canada, and they was the Canadian born, and then they moved to Australia. And then they got used to Australian coffee. And when they went to Canada, they couldn't find good coffee. And then one day they found good coffee, and only to find out the barista was Australian. So
it's a big part of our identity here in Australia.
It's a big part of our identity. And it's you go out, when you go, for me, it's when I go out, I like to buy a drink or, buy a food. And I feel I don't have attachments to a lot of things, but even just that attachment to, okay, when you're a little bit bored, let's go and buy. It's kind of like a little fun thing to do. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just there's a lot of nice cafes around, and you just buy a drink or something, and that in itself is an attachment. And I remember when we started fasting, it's you go out, you can't do that, and that's even something that's a little bit I've got to let go of that. Breaking that attachment of even just the habit of, buying something when you're out.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because you also mentioned this a bit earlier, where I guess Ramadan is like breaking those attachments. You have to kind of face the reality, and I guess if you do notice an imbalance or something happening to your body, that's a good sign that you are imbalanced in some aspect. Because if I've seen because for me, right, I used to maybe 1 or 2 years ago, I used to drink when I would be kind of having to have a full on day or something, I would drink coffee, and then I kind of realized firstly I'm not I like coffee, but I don't. It's not for me naturally to have it every day. I feel I've only had it every day. It's because everyone else around me is having it every day. Because at the office or something, everyone's do you want a coffee run? I'm yeah, might as well, whatever. So that was the only reason I was having it regularly. But in saying that, I still like coffee and stuff, but not that I guess the reason is to stay awake. But I felt also listening to other people, you mentioned as well, you mentioned a lot more detail, mashallah. I just knew someone else in a different podcast was just too much of an attachment isn't good to it anyway, because and that
Yeah.
person just recommended that, look, if you need it, like for example, I don't know, if you're having a long drive and you might need to, drive in the night and need to stay awake,
Mm.
or doing something important
Yeah.
assignment late at night, like then have it then,
Yeah.
but don't make it like,
Yeah.
because as you mentioned, like your body does get used to it, and then to get that kind of coffee high, you'd need like 2 cups or 3 cups eventually, right, over
Yeah.
time to get that
Yeah.
hit, compared to just like the one that you may need now. That's enough. So I guess like for me, I kind of recognize that to some degree. So for me, it's like I just like exercise in the morning, and that helps me like kind of to stay like refreshed and sort of
Mm.
awake. So I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the substitute that I've done for
Yeah.
like Ramadan. Now I kind of exercise at later, like 1 hour before iftar, but like usually that's how I'd roll with it. And yeah, like I'd see, like, because I'm on Twitter and Facebook and so I just see so many statuses from like all Muslims. Oh, I can't live without this coffee. Oh, I'm getting sick, without coffee during Ramadan. Oh, I'm my close friend is like, I'm getting headaches every day, so I have to make
Mm.
sure I have a cup of coffee just before, like just during suhoor. I'm just like,
Mm.
I don't know what you're on about. But
Yeah.
not saying I'm perfect anyway. I've got other
Yeah.
issues in other areas, but just coffee specifically just kind of
Yeah.
touches on the broader point of just addictions in general. So I think that's a really good
Yeah.
point that you brought up. Like I guess we all sort of, like, for me, I guess my one would be like, diet in general, because just
Yeah.
I think I enjoy like eating out and stuff. So I think everyone just has a sort of thing that they need to recognize if they have an attachment
Yeah.
to, which is too much in
Yeah.
excess. And
Well,
I think Ramadan's a
yeah.
good time to reflect on that.
Yeah. And I think Ramadan's a good time to break away from them. But I think constantly we need to monitor when we're sorry, when we're starting to develop attachments. And I actually, even to like people. So I attended a class recently where the teacher was talking about even avoiding people. So even like people that are your friends and things like that, you shouldn't have a dependency. Like so it was saying like avoid them until you're not dependent on their company and they're not dependent on your company. And this is from a Islamic perspective. So and it's so amazing where in Islam we actually, if you look at it, we're actually taught to cut off all connections. And we hear this, right? We hear this in words, but in practice, what does it look like? It's like cut off all connections from this dunya and you only have a connection to God. Like that's where your connection should be. And I think we feel that void of having that strong connection with God by having lots of little attachments to all these little things, whether it be people, whether it be food, whether it be habits, whether it be, one of those, or addiction to anything else. We try to cover that void by doing those kind of attachments, but they're never going to be strong enough to hold us, right? And that's when we fall into a lot of traps of whether it be as soon as that attachment, as soon as whatever it is that you're attached to gets moved or pulled away, you fall. And for me, it's like in Yasmin Mujahid's book, she talks about people getting upset because as soon as the attachment is taken away from them, and she used this example which I thought was really beautiful. Like it kind of paints the picture really well, where like you were leaning on a twig, you were leaning on a branch that was never designed to carry you. It's not strong enough to carry you, and that's what we try to do with all these little attachments. And it's when these attachments are broken, we feel lost because we don't have that strong connection with God.
Well, yeah, definitely. Like, I think just to take even a temperament lens and just the idea of balance as well. Like, for example, I assume like all sort of temperaments will have that sort of pitfall, and I guess the whole idea is to be having the right response to each situation. Like, for example, like a sanguine would be more inclined to always be with people and have a good time, and that's kind of, I guess, at times they may fall into a certain extreme of just doing that and wanting only that, and that kind of, like, I guess the happiness is sort of dictated by just being around with friends. And I guess what the struggle, and I think Mohammed Ishaq also mentioned this in his workshop, is that what they'll sanguines will have the biggest struggle with is actually like ibadah, at late at night, or like doing things on their own, or or sort of worshipping Allah and building that strong spiritual connection. They'll find it the most hardest because they always like to be around people, right? So that's why they want to pray and in the mosque with other people. That's kind of what they want to do. But at the same time, it's like about realizing that it's about being sort of balanced on a holistic level, right? So it's about us working towards what we need to sort of be balanced. So for example, if there's like, let's just say a melancholic who wants to be a bit more reserved, right? I guess like from Islamic point of view, for example, like it's encouraged that if you go to eat, you should go eat with someone, right? So it's not like you fall to an extreme of you just always wanting to be by yourself and eating out. So I guess Islam kind of offers that, sort of makes it aware through, the hadiths and stuff, that we should be balanced, that, we should bring, like, it's not like we should always have to be with company, but at the same time, it's not like we should always be alone. It's about making sure, like, exactly. No, being independent, and then at the same time, like, if there's people around you, and then being social, and then at the same time, when you are alone, it's not like you want to always hop on a Zoom call. Like, I don't know, people during this quarantine time, it's like for sanguines might be a big struggle. Like, oh, people aren't around me, I'm just going to be on Zoom calls all day, because that's where the fun is. So it's about being able to.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Like, I guess, it's about working on that independence in that aspect as well. So, sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I guess also that would kind of also show a bit more of the imbalance. When even like for a sanguine, even though they are more people person, if it's like, if they can't have any time alone on their own, then that also shows that there's an issue there. There's a problem that needs to be addressed. And again, with a melancholic or a phlegmatic that is always on their own, so again, it's like there's an issue there. They that needs to be addressed. There's an imbalance somewhere there. Even though they prefer it, being balanced will kind of make sure that there's a balance of both.
Yeah, I guess it also comes down to self-awareness, like knowing and having that knowledge that
and reflecting.
You need to, and pondering as well. So I guess, I don't know, like for some people, I guess it's like it does happen towards maybe the latter stages, or maybe even, early on. It is what it is, but essentially it is about working towards that sort of balance. And I love how, like, I guess what you're doing, and with the 4 temperaments, it's about like giving that framework and model in order to understand it in a more deeper level, so that we can know that we have these sort of XYZ issues that need to be. So like, for example, maybe a phlegmatic will tend to, like, I know in instances where perhaps maybe in the seerah some phlegmatic characters were a bit more timid when they needed to be strong and courageous. They sort of didn't exhibit that. So it's about realizing that, that's your sort of weak point, and it's about working towards being balanced, because we need to be, I guess, upright human, not just for, I guess, ourselves, but also for, giving to the community, and sort of holistically following the hadiths and the sunnah as well. So I know that we've actually, mashallah, like, time's sort of flown by on the podcast, but I think we've covered like many sort of diverse sort of topics, and that's good. I guess like that's kind of the aim of Boys in the Cave, like just to sort of bring different insights. And mashallah, I think you're doing amazing works, and I certainly, mashallah, benefited tremendously from the workshop. Like, I guess, was there anything you just wanted to add in general? Because I might ask like 1 or 2 quick questions and probably wrap it up, inshallah. But was there anything else you wanted to add to what I just said in terms of?
Just thank you for having me on here. And you're doing amazing work too, giving insights from different perspectives so people can hear it, because I think that's how we build tolerance and just understanding towards each other. Even like, even with, I guess you would have known yourself when you learn about temperaments, you start to have more empathy towards other people, and you're not speaking from a place of ignorance. So I guess you spreading this, the podcast and having perspectives of different things, like, really gains awareness and insights into different perspectives, which is quite amazing too. So thank you.
Oh, it's an honor hosting someone like yourself and others that have been on in general, because everyone's got their sort of different insights and skills and expertise. So it's about kind of showcasing on a platform, because unfortunately it's not being done as much as we'd anticipate. So I guess, and like in terms of I guess the perspectives as well, It's about like now it's more like alhamdulillah being able to connect with the right people, even like someone like yourself. It's realizing, like, for example, I used to, those people, like you become a bit more, like, for me personally, it's like I become a bit more empathetic to people that are a bit more angry, quick to anger. For me, before it was like, what's wrong
Yeah.
with them? Like, you know what I mean? But now it's like,
Yeah.
a bit of refinement and understanding. And it's something that I should have personally already have embodied through the sunnah anyway. It's in the hadiths, right? You shouldn't be quick to judge people anyway. But I guess this
Yeah.
science and what you're doing allows that sort of empathy as well, in order for us to be, inshallah, a lot more balanced. As well, I guess as a last question, we sort of ask this to all our guests. Got to be in a cave, essentially. Who would you chill with? It could be anyone from the past, or it could be anyone that's present and living now. Anyone that's perhaps maybe inspired you in general, or because I know you sort of got into naturopathy because of I forgot the reasons exactly, sorry, but maybe someone along that journey sort of influenced you. So if you could just name maybe 3 people that have inspired you and you'd love to have a chat with.
Okay, so only 3 people. I'm only allowed 3 people. It's a tough one. But so only 3. Okay. Oh, this is hard. Well, I already know who. It's just too many people.
Yeah. It's a difficult question, to be honest, but that's why we leave it to the end.
Okay, so we have to keep, bring it down to 3. Oh, okay. Okay. Obviously, the Prophet ﷺ is going to be my number 1. Okay.
Okay, sorry, I forgot to mention
tough.
this. You can't pick prophets or Sahaba, because everyone's gonna pick them anyway. So we'll just assume they're in the cave already, and you just got to pick 3 other people.
They're not included. Okay. So what's funny is I've actually in this time of isolation, I've actually been reading certain people's books, and so I think I'm going to choose those 3 based on right now. So I would say Imam al-Haddad, Ibn Atta'Allah, and Imam Ghazali.
MashaAllah. Good to be able to chat with in a cave as well, especially regarding I guess your expertise as well. I think they'll have a lot of interesting insights as well.
Yeah.
Specifically Imam Ghazali as well.
Yeah. Well, like I guess over the span of my profession, I just found how important and how much Islam ties with health. So, and if we look at like the Prophet ﷺ's teachings about health, a lot of it is not being said because a lot of it is not. It's not all about physical health. It's mainly about spiritual health. So, yeah. So it would be amazing if I could chill with those 3.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. But I guess alhamdulillah, like just to probably wrap it up there, we've actually hit almost the 3-hour mark, mashallah. I think a lot of gems, mashallah, to discuss. I'll probably have to listen to all this again just to get more insights and probably pick up on what I've missed out on. But just for the listeners that want to kind of connect with you, I know that you run kind of is it a clinic, or I think you have your own sort of space that you work out of as well. If people wanted to kind of connect with you, or I know you're doing the workshop, and people may want to get more information about that. And by the way, I guess for the listeners as well, what we talked about, like in the workshop, you go into very specifics, like for example, this temperament will prefer this foods and this and that. So it's not like this is a substitute for anything. This is more like a general just kind of discussion about general kind of things, and then kind of talking about it in general. But you in the workshop, you actually go very deep and specific, which is really, mashallah, very insightful. So if you could just give like the audience a bit more information of how they can kind of connect with you and all that.
Yeah, so I would say, like as a reminder that anything that you hear from a workshop or the workshops, it's not to be used as a substitute for medical advice as an individual. Like as an individual, you should always, seek, professional advice. But I operate in Bankstown, and I've got a website as well. That's motheringcare.com.au, or you can even do naimahapdat.com. And on Instagram, it's Naimah Naturopath. And I run workshops at Life Matters. Most, like when I do run the workshops, it's generally in Bankstown or online, or with Knowing Yourself. So inshallah, keep an eye out there as well with Knowing Yourself. So that's on Instagram. It's I think it's at the moment it's Ishaq .Mohammed, or even if you type up, I think Knowing Yourself, it will come up. So if for other workshops that we'll do in the future, inshallah. Other than that, you can go onto my Instagram page or my website, and to contact me, whether you want to see me for a consultation, or in person in clinic in Bankstown, or whether you want to see me online and do a consultation online. So I do have clients that are international as well. So I've been able to locate the herbs and things like that for other people, especially like in the UK. So yeah,
I think I guess I'll just put all the links inshallah to all that, so people can sort of check it out inshallah. And and I think you'll be running perhaps more in the workshops in the future, so our audience and listeners can check out your pages to see all of that. But alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair for coming on Boys in the Cave. It was really an honor, and inshallah you keep doing what you're doing, and inshallah keep benefiting in more people. And inshallah this goes out to people, because I know I have a lot of kind of friends that are more into the general practitioners and pharmacists. So inshallah a lot of skeptics will change their mind just a little bit. It's about exploring different things and kind of considering different perspectives. So inshallah that also happens in the process.
All right, thank you so much.
No worries. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or queries, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com, and you can find us on Facebook, and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. Inshallah, they'll help us podcast to go up the rankings, and so others can see it and benefit from the information and content as well. So from our special guest Naimah and myself, we wish you the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.